The stagecoach deposited Eliza Mercer onto the frozen mud of Blackstone Ridge's main street on a Tuesday afternoon that felt like the world had run out of mercy. She stepped down onto the boardwalk with her worn leather suitcase gripped in both hands, her traveling coat doing almost nothing against the mountain wind that cut through the town like a knife looking for something soft to ruin. Nobody looked at her twice. Women arrived in frontier towns every week, most left within a month. Eliza didn't plan on being most women. She'd answered the advertisement 3 weeks earlier, sitting in a boarding house in Philadelphia that smelled like boiled cabbage and broken promises. The newspaper clipping had been direct to the point of brutality. Rancher seeks capable woman for practical arrangement. No romance. Hard work required. Respond only if desperate enough to mean it. She'd written back that same night, not because she dreamed of the frontier, not because she believed in fresh starts or new beginnings, or any of the lies people told themselves when their lives fell apart. She wrote back because Richard Pemberton, her former employer, her former mistake, her former everything, had made sure she'd never work in Philadelphia again. One letter to the right people, one whispered accusation. That's all it took to turn a respected bookkeeper into a woman no respectable household would hire. The frontier didn't ask questions about Philadelphia. That made it the only place left. Garrett Vale's ranch sat 7 miles outside town, accessed by a road that seemed designed to kill hope before you ever reached the property. The man who drove her out, a weathered freight hauler named Cobb, didn't say much beyond pointing out which landmarks meant you were still headed the right direction. "That's the Vale place," Cobb finally said, nodding toward a cluster of buildings that looked like they were barely holding on to existence. Been in his family 30 years. Was something once. What happened? Same thing that happens to everybody out here eventually. Weather, debt, bad luck. Cobb glanced at her sidelong. "You really gonna marry him?" "That's the arrangement." "Arrangement?" Cobb made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a cough. "That what they're calling it now?" The ranch house came into clearer view as they approached. A 2-story structure that might have been impressive once, surrounded by outbuildings in various states of disrepair. Fencing sagged. The barn needed new boards. Snow had drifted against the north side of everything like the territory itself was trying to bury the whole operation. Garrett Vale stood on the porch waiting. He was tall in the way frontier men often were, built from hard work and harder winters. Dark hair, darker eyes, a jaw that looked like it had forgotten how to do anything except clench. He didn't smile when Cobb's wagon rolled to a stop, didn't wave, just stood there with his arms crossed, like he was evaluating livestock he wasn't sure he wanted to buy. Eliza climbed down before Cobb could offer help she didn't need. "Miss Mercer." Garrett's voice matched everything else about him. Rough, direct, stripped of anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. "Mr. Vale?" He looked at her suitcase, then at her face, then back at the suitcase like he was trying to figure out if this was really all she'd brought. "That everything?" "I travel light." "Good. Out here you don't keep what you can't carry." He stepped off the porch, moved past her to hand Cobb a few coins. "Appreciate the ride." Cobb tipped his hat, gave Eliza one last look that might have been sympathy or might have been something worse, then turned his wagon back toward town. The silence that followed felt enormous. "We should talk terms before anything gets official," Garrett said, already walking toward the house. "Make sure we understand each other." Eliza followed him inside. The interior of the ranch house was exactly what she expected. Functional, cold, decorated by someone who'd stopped caring about decoration years ago. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Rough furniture built for durability instead of comfort. Everything clean enough to prove someone lived here, but empty enough to prove they'd stopped living months ago. Garrett gestured toward a chair at the wooden table. Eliza sat. He remained standing, leaning against the far counter with his arms still crossed like he needed the physical barrier. "I'm not looking for a wife," he said bluntly. "I'm looking for a partner. Someone smart enough to help run this place and stubborn enough not to quit when it gets hard. Which it will. I understood that from your advertisement. What I need is someone who can manage books, negotiate with suppliers, catch problems. I'm too tired to see anymore. I need someone who won't fall apart the first time things go bad." His eyes narrowed slightly. "What I don't need is someone expecting romance or pretty words or any of the things women usually want from marriage." Eliza met his gaze without flinching. Then we're well matched, Mr. Vale. Because I'm not here for romance. I'm here because I need a place where my past doesn't matter, and my future is my own. If that requires hard work and a practical arrangement, I'm more than capable. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, but close enough. Your letter said you worked as a bookkeeper for 6 years. Household management, business ledgers, contract review. I kept the Pemberton estate running smoothly through 3 financial panics and 2 lawsuits. She paused. Until I didn't. What happened? I trusted someone I shouldn't have, made a mistake, paid for it. Eliza kept her voice level, factual. The details don't matter. What matters is I'm good at what I do, and I need work nobody can take away because of rumors or lies. Garrett studied her for a long moment. Fair enough. I'm not interested in your past either, just your future work. He pushed off from the counter, crossed to a cabinet, and pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, poured 2 fingers in each without asking if she wanted any. The ranch is failing, he said flatly, sliding 1 glass toward her. Not because I don't work hard enough. I work from sunup past midnight most days. It's failing because I'm getting cheated on supply costs, undercut on cattle sales, and squeezed by men with deeper pockets who want this land for themselves. He took a drink. I need someone smart enough to figure out where the problems are coming from and mean enough to fix them. Eliza took a sip of the whiskey. It burned exactly the way whiskey should. And in exchange, you get a roof, food, protection, and half say in how this place runs. Your name on the deed once we're legally married. Nobody controls your future except you and me together. He set his glass down hard. But understand this, Miss Mercer. If you're planning to take what you can and run, save us both the trouble and leave now. I don't have time for games. I don't play games, Mr. Vale, and I don't run. She finished her whiskey, set the glass down with equal firmness. When do we start? Tomorrow. Town minister can make it official this week if you're sure. I'm sure. Garrett nodded once. Then we have an arrangement. They shook hands across the table like business partners signing a contract, which Eliza supposed they were. Passant. The wedding happened 4 days later in the minister's cramped office, witnessed by 2 people Garrett pulled off the street who looked confused about why they were there. The ceremony lasted maybe 5 minutes. Garrett answered, I do, like he was confirming a livestock purchase. Eliza signed her new name in the register with the same careful precision she'd once used on Pemberton financial documents. Mrs. Eliza Vale. It looked strange on paper. It felt stranger in practice. The townspeople who bothered to notice gave them a week before she ran off, or he threw her out. The general store owner, a round man named Patterson who seemed to know everyone's business, made a point of telling Eliza the ranch was cursed. 3 owners before Vale, Patterson said, while weighing out flour Eliza had come to purchase. All of them failed. Land's too rough. Winter's too hard. And now with Horace Dunn controlling most of the cattle contracts in the territory, he trailed off meaningfully. Who's Horace Dunn? Patterson's face went carefully neutral. Man who owns the biggest operation within 100 miles. Controls grain contracts, shipping routes, most of the buyers. If Dunn decides he wants you gone, you're gone. And does Mr. Dunn want my husband gone? Let's just say Garrett Vale hasn't made things easy on himself by refusing to sell when Dunn made offers. Patterson handed over her supplies with a look that might have been pity. You seem like a practical woman, Mrs. Vale. Maybe you can talk sense into him before it's too late. Eliza carried her purchases back to the wagon Garrett had lent her, thinking about men who controlled territories through money and threats, and about how every empire had cracks if you knew where to look. The first week at the ranch was brutal. Not because Garrett was cruel. He wasn't. He barely spoke to her outside of necessary instructions, but he wasn't unkind. The brutality came from the work itself. Eliza had never lived on a ranch before. She'd never fed livestock in freezing darkness, never hauled water from a pump that fought you every step, never split firewood until your hands blistered and your shoulders screamed. But she'd also never quit anything in her life, and she wasn't starting now. She learned the rhythms fast. Morning chores before sunrise. Garrett handling the cattle and heavy repairs while Eliza managed the house, the books, the supplies. Dinner eaten in silence. Evenings spent reviewing ledgers by lamplight while Garrett repaired tack or sharpened tools. The only sound between them, the crackle of fire and the wind howling outside. It was lonely in a way Eliza hadn't expected. Not because she missed Philadelphia, she didn't, but because she'd somehow thought a marriage, even a practical one, might include occasional conversation beyond "we need more fence wire" and "supplies are running low." Garrett seemed perfectly content with silence. Until the night Eliza spread 3 months of ranch financial records across the kitchen table and realized something was very, very wrong. "Mr. Vale," she said, interrupting him mid-task with the bridle he was oiling, "these numbers don't make sense." He glanced up, irritated. "What numbers?" "Your supply costs from Patterson's store. You're paying nearly double what the going rate should be for basics. Flour, salt, feed grain, all of it inflated." She slid one ledger toward him. "And your cattle sales from last season. You should have cleared at least $1,500 based on head count and market prices. You barely cleared $800. Garrett's jaw tightened. "I know the numbers are bad. That's why you're here. Bad implies unfortunate circumstances. This implies systematic cheating." Eliza tapped the page firmly. "Someone's been manipulating your costs and skimming your sales, probably for years." "You think I don't know I'm getting cheated?" Garrett's voice went hard. "Out here, that's just how it works. Men like Horace Dunn control the buyers, the suppliers, the shipping. You either pay what they ask or you lose everything trying to fight them." "So you've just been accepting it?" "I've been surviving it." He threw the bridle down onto the table with enough force to make the lamp flicker. "You've been here 1 week, Mrs. Vale. Don't presume to understand how this territory operates." Eliza held his glare without backing down. "I understand numbers, Mr. Vale, and these numbers say you're being destroyed slowly instead of all at once, which means whoever's doing it wants to bleed you dry before taking the ranch themselves." Something dangerous flashed in Garrett's eyes. "You think I don't know that? My father spent 30 years building this place, died trying to save it from men exactly like Dunn. I'm not going to dishonor his memory by selling out the first time things get hard. I'm not suggesting you sell. I'm suggesting you fight smarter instead of just bleeding out with honor. And how exactly do you plan to fight men who control everything?" Eliza smiled thinly. "The same way I survived 6 years working for a man who thought women were decorative property. You find the cracks in their system. You document everything. And when the moment's right, you make sure the right people see exactly what's been happening." Garrett stared at her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. "You really think you can take on Horace Dunn?" "I think," Eliza said carefully, "that men who get comfortable cheating people get careless. And careless men make mistakes. We just need to be patient enough to catch them." The silence that followed felt different than the previous week's emptiness. This silence hummed with something that might have been possibility. "What do you need from me?" Garrett finally asked. "Access to every contract, every receipt, every deal you've made in the last 3 years. Names of who you've worked with, dates, amounts, everything." "That's a lot of records." "Then we'd better get started." They worked until past midnight that night, Garrett pulling out boxes of paperwork he'd shoved into corners and forgotten about, Eliza sorting through them with the methodical precision of someone who'd been trained to find patterns in chaos. By the time they finally stopped, Eliza had filled 6 pages with notes. Garrett looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. "My father used to say the frontier breaks everyone eventually," he said quietly, staring into the dying fire. "That the only question is whether you break trying to build something or break trying to destroy someone else." "What do you think?" "I think he died broken either way." Garrett's voice went rough. "And I'm terrified I'm going to do the same thing." It was the first truly honest thing he'd said to her since she'd arrived. Eliza didn't offer false comfort, didn't tell him it would be fine. Instead, she said, "Then let's make sure if we break, it's because we tried everything, not because we gave up without fighting." Garrett looked at her across the table, really looked at her, the same way she'd looked at those ledgers, searching for something hidden beneath the surface. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Neither are you." Something that wasn't quite a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Get some sleep, Mrs. Vale. Tomorrow we start digging into how deep this goes." "Tomorrow," Eliza agreed. She climbed the stairs to the small bedroom Garrett had given her, separate from his own, per their arrangement, and lay in the darkness listening to the wind shake the windows. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt something that wasn't quite hope, but was close enough to fool her exhausted heart. The next 3 weeks turned into a war fought with paperwork and patience. Eliza worked through every scrap of documentation Garrett had accumulated, building a picture of systematic fraud that went back nearly 5 years. It wasn't just Patterson's store overcharging, though he definitely was. It was shipping agents who claimed cattle arrived underweight, buyers who insisted market prices had dropped right before purchase dates, supply contractors who added mysterious handling fees that never appeared in original agreements. And at the center of it all, like a spider in a very profitable web, was Horace Dunn. His name appeared everywhere, sometimes directly, more often through companies he controlled or men who worked for him. He'd built an empire by making himself indispensable. If you wanted to sell cattle in 3 territories, you went through Dunn's buyers. If you needed grain shipped before winter, you used Dunn's freight contracts. If you needed credit to survive a bad season, Dunn's bank held the notes. And if you refused to cooperate, your costs mysteriously increased until cooperation became survival. "He's been positioning to take this ranch for years," Eliza said one evening, showing Garrett a timeline she'd constructed. "Look, 5 years ago, your father refused to sell. That's when supply costs started climbing. 3 years ago, your father died and you took over. Cattle sale prices dropped 30% that same season. Last year, Dunn made you another offer through a proxy company. You refused. This year, your costs have increased another 40%. Garrett's knuckles went white, gripping the table edge. "He's been strangling us slowly. Slowly enough that you'd think it was just bad luck. Market forces. Hard times." Eliza met his eyes. "But it's not luck. It's strategy. So what do we do? Even if we can prove it, Dunn controls half the county officials. Who's going to care about some rancher getting cheated?" "Other ranchers getting cheated the same way." Garrett frowned. "What? Dunn's too smart to only target one property. If he's doing this to you, he's doing it to others. We just need to find them and convince them to compare notes. Nobody's going to admit they're getting cheated. Out here, that's the same as admitting you're weak. Then we don't ask them to admit anything." Eliza tapped the papers in front of her. "We just start asking questions, casual conversation. How are cattle prices treating you this season? Supply costs getting rough? Heard Dunn's offering to buy more land. Anyone considering selling?" Understanding dawned on Garrett's face. "You want to gather information without anyone knowing that's what we're doing." "Exactly. Build a network of evidence from multiple sources. Then, when we have enough proof, we take it somewhere Dunn can't control." "Like where?" "The territorial legislature, federal land office, cattle association headquarters." Eliza smiled grimly. "Men like Dunn are powerful locally because people are afraid of them. But their power has limits. We just need to find those limits and push." Garrett looked at her like she'd suggested attacking a fortress with a pocket knife. "That's incredibly dangerous. So is standing still while we drown." He couldn't argue with that. The plan started small. Garrett made trips into town more frequently, stopping at the saloon where ranchers gathered, buying rounds of drinks and listening more than he talked. Eliza attended the women's auxiliary meetings she'd been avoiding, enduring gossip and speculation while carefully steering conversations toward household budgets and supply costs. Slowly, patterns emerged. The Henderson Ranch, struggling after 3 years of mysteriously low cattle sales. The Morrison family, drowning under inflated grain contracts they couldn't afford to break. The Whitaker spread, facing foreclosure after a loan from Dunn's bank came due with interest rates that had somehow tripled. Every conversation confirmed what Eliza had suspected. Garrett's ranch wasn't uniquely targeted. It was just one property in a larger campaign of systematic exploitation. "Dunn's building an empire by crushing everyone too weak to fight back," Garrett said after returning from a particularly revealing conversation with Tom Henderson. "And anyone strong enough to resist gets destroyed as an example to everyone else." "Then we become an example of something different," Eliza replied. "But becoming that example required something they didn't have, undeniable proof that couldn't be dismissed or buried." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Eliza had started visiting Patterson's general store more frequently, always polite, always paying in cash, always making small talk while Patterson's young clerk, a nervous boy named Timothy, handled her purchases. Timothy was maybe 17, rail-thin, with hands that shook slightly whenever Patterson barked orders at him. Eliza recognized fear when she saw it. She'd worn it herself once. One afternoon, she accidentally dropped her coin purse while Patterson was in the back room. Timothy scrambled to help her collect the scattered money, and Eliza took the opportunity. "You seem like a bright young man, Timothy," she said quietly. "How long have you worked here?" "2 years, ma'am." His voice barely rose above a whisper. "And do you enjoy it?" His eyes darted toward the back room. It's work." "Mr. Patterson treats you well?" Timothy's face went carefully blank. "He pays me, but not fairly." Eliza kept her voice gentle. "I've seen how hard you work. I've also seen the way he speaks to you. I need this job, Mrs. Vale." Timothy's hands twisted together. "My mother's sick. I understand." Eliza placed her hand briefly over his. "I'm not trying to get you in trouble, Timothy. I'm just trying to understand how things work in this town, particularly how Mr. Patterson's pricing works." Timothy's eyes went wide with understanding and terror. I don't know anything about—" "Of course not," Eliza said smoothly, collecting the last of her coins. "I wouldn't expect you to. But if you ever did notice anything unusual, records that didn't match, pricing that seemed inconsistent, instructions from Mr. Patterson that didn't quite make sense, well, I imagine that might weigh on a person's conscience. Mrs. Vale, you know where the Vale Ranch is, don't you, Timothy?" He nodded mutely. "If you ever need help, if your mother needs anything, if you ever find yourself in a situation where doing the right thing feels dangerous." Eliza held his gaze. "We take care of people who take care of us," Patterson's voice boomed from the back room, demanding Timothy's help with inventory. Eliza gathered her purchases and left, not knowing if her gamble would pay off. 3 days later, just after sunset, someone knocked on the ranch house door. Garrett answered with his hand on his belt knife. Visitors after dark usually meant trouble. Timothy stood on the porch, shaking like a leaf in a windstorm, clutching a canvas bag to his chest like it contained his entire future. "I brought something," he whispered. "Something you need to see." Inside the bag were 2 ledger books. Not the official records Patterson kept openly in the store. These were private accounts, hidden records that documented the real costs of goods versus what Patterson charged customers. Years of deliberate price manipulation, inflated costs, and kickback payments to Horace Dunn for every rancher who got cheated. "He keeps them locked in his office," Timothy explained, his whole body trembling. "I found them when I was cleaning. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. And then I couldn't stop thinking about all the families struggling to pay for basic supplies while Patterson and Dunn got rich off their suffering." Eliza wanted to weep with gratitude. Instead, she poured Timothy coffee and made sure he understood exactly how brave he'd been. "This is enough," she told Garrett later after Timothy had left with a promise of future employment once the Vales could afford to hire help. "With these ledgers and the information we've gathered from other ranchers, we have proof of systematic fraud." "So we take it to the county officials?" "No." Eliza's smile was sharp as broken glass. "We take it directly to Horace Dunn." Garrett stared at her. "That's suicide. That's strategy. If we go to officials first, Dunn has time to cover his tracks, intimidate witnesses, make evidence disappear. But if we confront him directly, force him to respond while we hold proof he doesn't know we have—" She let the implication hang. "He'll either buy us off or destroy us." "He'll try to destroy us. But he'll make mistakes while doing it. Angry men always do." Eliza met Garrett's eyes across the table. "And when he makes those mistakes, we'll be ready." Garrett was quiet for a long time, studying her face like he was trying to understand how a woman who'd arrived with nothing but a worn suitcase had become someone willing to walk into a lion's den carrying nothing but evidence and audacity. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met," he finally said, "or the most reckless." "Can I be both?" Something that might have been admiration flickered in his expression. "When do we do this?" "Tomorrow. Before Dunn hears that Timothy stole his ledgers. Before Patterson realizes his private books are missing." Eliza's hands were steady, but her heart hammered. "We ride into town, walk into Dunn's office, and show him exactly what we know. And then we see if the most powerful man in the territory is smart enough to back down when someone calls his bluff." They spent the rest of the night preparing, copying key pages from the ledgers in case the originals were destroyed, writing out sworn statements documenting conversations with other cheated ranchers, creating redundant copies of everything that mattered. As dawn broke over the mountain ridges, Eliza stood at the window watching pink light spill across the frozen landscape. Behind her, Garrett moved through the house, making final preparations, checking supplies, loading his rifle just in case. Mrs. Vale. His voice came from directly behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold room. Before we do this, I need to say something. She turned. Garrett looked uncomfortable in a way she'd never seen before, like he was about to attempt something far more difficult than confronting a corrupt cattle broker. When you answered my advertisement, I thought I was getting someone desperate enough to work hard and smart enough not to cause problems. He paused, jaw working. I didn't expect to get someone willing to fight this hard for something that isn't even really theirs. This ranch is half mine now. You put my name on the deed. The ranch, yes. But this fight? This risk? He shook his head. You could walk away tomorrow and nobody would blame you. Hell, most people would call you smart for getting out before Dunn destroys everything. Is that what you want? For me to leave? No. The word came out rough, honest. No, I don't. Which is why I need you to understand what we're walking into. Horace Dunn doesn't lose gracefully. If we do this, he'll retaliate. He'll come after the ranch, our reputation, maybe our lives. There's no backing down once we start. Eliza met his eyes steadily. I've never been good at backing down, Mr. Vale. It's one of my more inconvenient qualities. Garrett. What? My name. It's Garrett. We're about to potentially die together. Seems like we should at least use first names. Despite everything, despite the fear coiled in her stomach and the enormous risk they were about to take, Eliza smiled. Eliza, she said. Eliza. He said her name like he was testing how it felt. Are you ready for this? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Garrett's expression shifted into something that might have been the beginning of a smile if he'd remembered how. Then let's go make the most powerful man in the territory very, very angry. They rode into Blackstone Ridge together as the town was waking up, their horses' breath steaming in the frigid morning air. A few early risers watched them pass with curious eyes. By noon, Eliza knew, the entire town would be talking about what happened next. Horace Dunn's office occupied the finest building on Main Street, a two-story brick structure that proclaimed success and permanence in a territory where most buildings were lucky to survive 5 winters. A painted sign above the door read, Dunn Cattle Company and Associates. Associates. Eliza had learned that was Dunn's way of saying, everything I control without admitting I control it. They tied their horses and walked through the front door without knocking. The clerk at the front desk, a pale man with ink-stained fingers, looked up in surprise. Can I help you? We're here to see Mr. Dunn, Garrett said flatly. Tell him Garrett Vale and his wife need a few minutes of his time. Do you have an appointment? No, tell him we have something he'll want to see before it goes public. The clerk's eyes went wide. He disappeared into the back office. 2 minutes later, he returned. Mr. Dunn will see you now. Horace Dunn's private office was designed to intimidate. Rich wood paneling, expensive furniture shipped from back east. A massive desk that looked like it could double as a fortress wall. Behind it sat a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed, with silver hair and eyes that calculated profit the way other men calculated breathing. He didn't stand when they entered. Mr. Vale, and the new Mrs. Vale, I presume. Dunn's smile was practiced, professional, completely devoid of warmth. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? Garrett started to speak, but Eliza stepped forward first. We know about the price manipulation, Mr. Dunn. We have ledgers documenting 5 years of systematic fraud against ranchers across the territory. We know about the inflated supply costs, the rigged cattle sales, the coordinated effort to drive honest men out of business so you can acquire their land for pennies. Dunn's smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold as mountain stone. That's quite an accusation, Mrs. Vale. Based on what evidence? Eliza placed Patterson's private ledgers on the desk. Based on these, your partner's personal records, the ones he kept separate from his public accounts, the ones that document exactly how much profit you've made from cheating struggling families. For 3 heartbeats, Dunn didn't move. Then he opened one of the ledgers, flipped through a few pages, and closed it with careful precision. Where did you get these? Does it matter? It matters to whoever gave them to you. Patterson doesn't take kindly to theft. Neither do the families you've been stealing from for years. Eliza kept her voice level, professional. We're not here to negotiate, Mr. Dunn. We're here to inform you that this ends now. You release Garrett from any disputed contracts. You stop inflating prices at Patterson's store. You cease all efforts to acquire the Vale Ranch or any other property through intimidation and fraud. Dunn laughed. Actually laughed. A cold, amused sound. Or what? You'll take this to the county officials I play cards with every Thursday, the sheriff whose salary I supplement, the judge whose election campaign I funded? He leaned back in his expensive chair. My dear Mrs. Vale, you're clearly an intelligent woman. Surely you understand how power works in places like this. I understand that your power is built on people being too afraid to fight back, Eliza replied. I also understand that fear stops working once enough people get angry enough to risk everything. Is that a threat? It's a warning. We have copies of everything in those ledgers. If anything happens to us, if this ranch mysteriously burns down, if we have an unfortunate accident, those copies go to the territorial legislature, the federal land office, and every newspaper within 200 miles. Empty threats from desperate people. Dunn's voice hardened. Let me make something clear since you're apparently new to how things work. I control this territory because I provide stability. I provide markets. I provide the infrastructure that allows civilization to exist in a wilderness. Yes, I profit from it. Yes, I eliminate obstacles. That's called business. That's called theft with better vocabulary, Garrett said quietly. Dunn's attention shifted to him like a gun barrel finding a target. Your father understood reality better than you do, Vale. He knew when to quit fighting and accept that bigger men make the rules. That's why his death was tragic instead of pointless. You still have time to make the same wise choice. The threat was clear as daylight. Garrett's hand moved toward his belt, but Eliza caught his wrist. We're leaving now, she said calmly. You have 1 week to consider our terms. After that, the ledgers become public. What happens next is your choice. Dunn stood slowly, placing both hands on his desk like a judge delivering a verdict. No, Mrs. Vale. What happens next is already decided. You've made an enemy you can't afford. This ranch will fail. Your marriage will fail. And when you're broken and desperate, I'll buy your property for exactly what it's worth, which is considerably less than you think. We'll see, Eliza said. She turned and walked out, Garrett beside her, feeling Dunn's cold eyes on her back every step. They didn't speak until they were back on their horses, riding out of town. That went well, Garrett finally said with absolutely no humor. Better than I expected, actually. He looked at her like she'd lost her mind. He essentially threatened to destroy us. He threatened to try to destroy us. There's a difference. Eliza's hands were shaking now, adrenaline finally catching up with performance. Men like Dunn are used to people backing down the moment they show teeth. We didn't. That makes us unpredictable. Unpredictable enemies make mistakes. Or unpredictable enemies get crushed as examples. Then we'd better make sure we're too visible to crush quietly. They rode the rest of the way back to the ranch in silence, both of them processing what they'd just done and what it meant. The sun had climbed to midday by the time they reached home. Everything looked exactly as they'd left it. The sagging fences, the weathered buildings, the land that had taken 30 years to build and could be lost in 30 days if Dunn decided to destroy them. But somehow, standing there in the cold mountain light, Eliza felt something she hadn't felt since leaving Philadelphia. She felt like she was finally standing still long enough to fight instead of running. Garrett dismounted, helped her down even though she didn't need the help, and stood there for a moment looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For staying, for fighting, for being... He stopped, searching for words. For being someone I didn't know I needed until you showed up. Eliza felt something shift in her chest. Something warm and dangerous and completely inappropriate for a practical arrangement between two people who'd promised not to complicate things with feelings. We're partners, she said, keeping her voice steady. Partners don't abandon each other when things get hard. Partners, Garrett repeated. But the way he said it made it sound like he was testing whether the words still fit. Before either of them could say anything else they might regret, the sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. 6 riders came over the ridge, moving fast. Garrett's hand went to his rifle. Get inside. Who is it? Trouble. The riders pulled up in front of the house. Rough men with harder eyes, the kind who made their living doing things respectable people hired them for, but didn't talk about publicly. The lead rider was a scarred man with a voice like gravel. Got a message from Mr. Dunn. We're not interested, Garrett said coldly. Didn't ask if you were interested. The man smiled without humor. Mr. Dunn wants you to understand that he takes threats seriously, real seriously, so he wanted us to deliver a reminder about the cost of making enemies. Before either of them could react, two of the riders spurred their horses toward the northern fence line, pulled out torches, and set fire to 3 sections of fence before wheeling back. The dry wood caught instantly, flames roaring up in the cold air. You've got a week to reconsider your position, the scarred man said. After that, next time we burn something bigger than fences. They rode off laughing while Garrett and Eliza scrambled to put out the fires before they spread. It took 2 hours of desperate work to contain the damage. When they finally stopped, exhausted and ash-covered, they stood surveying the blackened fence posts that had once marked the northern boundary. This is what we signed up for, Garrett said grimly. This is what fighting Dunn means. I know. He'll keep escalating until we break or die. I know that too. Garrett turned to her, frustration and fear and something else warring in his expression. Then why aren't you scared? I am scared, Eliza admitted. I'm terrified, but I'm more terrified of spending the rest of my life running from men who think power gives them permission to destroy anyone weaker. She met his eyes in the smoke-tinged air. So we don't break. We don't run. We fight smarter, and we fight meaner, and we make sure that if Horace Dunn destroys us, we take enough of his empire down with us that everyone remembers what it cost him. Garrett stared at her for a long moment. Then, despite everything, despite the burned fences and the threats and the impossible odds, he started laughing. Not from humor, from the kind of exhausted, desperate recognition that comes when you realize you've found the only other person crazy enough to stand beside you when the whole world's trying to knock you down. Partners, he said again. This time Eliza heard what he really meant. This time she knew exactly what that word was becoming. Partners, she agreed. And as the smoke cleared and the sun started its descent toward the mountain peaks, 2 people who'd started as strangers bound by desperation began to look like something considerably more dangerous. They looked like people who'd decided to win. The burned fence posts still smoldered 3 days later, sending thin trails of smoke into the gray winter sky, like warning signals visible for miles. Garrett spent those days rebuilding what Dunn's men had destroyed, working from dawn until his hands bled and his shoulders screamed. Eliza worked beside him when she could, holding posts steady while he hammered, learning to string wire tight enough to hold even though her palms blistered raw. They didn't talk much, didn't need to. The work said everything. But on the 4th morning, when Eliza rode into town for supplies they desperately needed, she discovered that Horace Dunn had been busy doing more than sending men with torches. Patterson's store was unusually quiet when she entered. The typical cluster of women gossiping near the fabric section went silent the moment they saw her. Patterson himself looked uncomfortable, actually uncomfortable, which was new. Mrs. Vale, he said, his voice carefully neutral. What can I help you with today? Eliza placed her list on the counter, the usual supplies. Flour, salt, coffee, fence wire, if you have it. Patterson glanced at the list, then at her, then at the other customers watching with undisguised interest. I'm afraid I can't extend you credit anymore, he said quietly. Eliza had expected this. I'm paying cash. It's not about payment method, Mrs. Vale. It's about, well, there are concerns about your account. What concerns? Patterson shifted his weight uncomfortably. Mr. Dunn mentioned there might be some irregularities, issues with theft, missing ledgers from my office. The women near the fabric section weren't even pretending not to listen anymore. Eliza kept her voice level, professional. Are you accusing me of theft, Mr. Patterson? No, ma'am. I'm just saying that until certain matters are resolved, I've been advised not to do business with the Vale Ranch. Advised by whom? Patterson didn't answer, didn't need to. Eliza looked around the store at the watching faces, recognizing the fear there. Not fear of her, fear of what Dunn would do to anyone who helped her. I see, she said quietly. And does this advice extend to everyone in town, or just you? Patterson's silence was answer enough. Eliza collected her list, turned, and walked out with her head high and her stomach churning. Behind her, the whispers started immediately. She tried the hardware store next, same story. Then the grain supplier. Then the small trading post on the edge of town where she'd bought coffee last month. Nobody would sell to her, not because they hated her, because they were terrified of Dunn. By the time she climbed back onto her horse, Blackstone Ridge felt less like a town and more like enemy territory. The message was clear. Horace Dunn controlled everything here, and crossing him meant complete isolation. Eliza rode home empty-handed, fury building with each mile. Garrett was in the barn when she arrived, repairing a broken stall door. He took one look at her face and set down his tools. What happened? She told him. All of it. The refusals, the whispers, the complete economic blockade Dunn had orchestrated overnight. Garrett's jaw clenched tighter with each sentence. When she finished, he slammed his fist into the stall door hard enough to make the horses startle. That bastard. He's cutting off our supplies, trying to starve us out. Not just starve us, isolate us. Eliza paced the barn, her mind already working through options. He's making sure everyone knows the cost of helping us. It's not just about destroying our ranch anymore. It's about making us an example so nobody else gets ideas about fighting back. So what do? We can't survive without supplies. Winter's coming hard and we've got maybe 3 weeks of food left, less if we ration. We find suppliers outside Dunn's control. There aren't any within 50 miles. Everything routes through Blackstone Ridge, and Dunn controls it all. Eliza stopped pacing, an idea forming. Not everything. There are traveling merchants, circuit traders who move between territories. They don't answer to Dunn because they're not local. They also charge double because they know they can. Then we pay double. Whatever it takes to survive until we can break Dunn's hold. Garrett looked at her like she'd suggested they sprout wings and fly. With what money? We're barely scraping by as it is. The cattle sale money is spoken for, fencing, feed, property taxes coming due in spring. Then we use what we have. Assets, trade goods. Eliza's mind raced through inventory. We have tools we can spare. That old wagon that needs repair but someone handy could fix. The furniture in the spare rooms we don't use. You want to sell our belongings to buy basic supplies? I want to survive long enough to win this fight. Pride doesn't keep us fed. Garrett stared at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You really mean it, don't you? You're willing to sacrifice everything to stay here. This ranch is half mine now, remember? I don't give up what's mine without a fight. It's more than that. His voice went quiet, searching. You could still leave. Take what you can carry and disappear before Dunn makes things worse. Nobody would blame you. Would you blame me? The question hung between them like smoke. No, Garrett said finally, but I'd be disappointed and I'd be alone again. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her since they'd married. Maybe the most honest thing he'd said to anyone in years. Eliza felt something crack open in her chest, something warm and dangerous, and completely inappropriate for a practical arrangement that wasn't supposed to involve feelings. Then I guess it's fortunate I'm not leaving, she said, keeping her voice steady even though her heart was doing something complicated and terrifying. Garrett's expression flickered with something that might have been relief or might have been something deeper. Before either of them could examine it too closely, hoofbeats sounded outside. They both tensed, remembering Dunn's men with their torches. But the rider who appeared in the barn doorway wasn't one of Dunn's hired threats. It was Tom Henderson, the rancher Garrett had talked to weeks ago, looking windburned and exhausted. Vale, Henderson said without preamble. We need to talk. You got coffee? Inside the ranch house, Henderson wrapped his hands around a mug of weak coffee. They were already rationing supplies, and got straight to it. Word spreading about what you did, confronting Dunn, the burned fences, Patterson refusing to sell to you. He met Garrett's eyes. Half the territory's talking about whether you're brave or suicidal. What's the other half saying? Eliza asked. That you're the first people with enough spine to call Dunn out publicly. Henderson took a long drink. And that scares them. Because if you can fight Dunn, maybe they should too. But if you fail, they know they're next. So which camp are you in? Garrett asked carefully. Henderson set down his mug. The camp that's tired of being bled dry by a man who thinks owning money means owning people. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. This is my supply contract with Patterson's store for the last 2 years. Every inflated price, every mysterious fee, every time costs jumped right after I questioned something. Eliza took the paper, scanned it quickly, her pulse quickening. This matches the pattern from the ledgers we found, because it's not just you getting cheated. It's all of us. Morrison, Whitaker, the Callahan Ranch, the Stevens family. Everyone trying to survive out here without selling to Dunn. Henderson leaned forward. We've all been too afraid or too proud to admit we're getting destroyed the same way. But after what you did, riding into Dunn's office with proof, that changed something. Changed what? Garrett asked. Made us realize that fear only works when we're all suffering alone. Together? Henderson's expression hardened. Together we might actually have a chance. Eliza felt hope flare dangerously bright. You're saying other ranchers want to join the fight? I'm saying 4 families are waiting at Morrison's place right now, ready to pool evidence and figure out if we've got enough to take Dunn down properly. He stood. Question is whether you're willing to lead that fight, or if you just wanted to save your own ranch. Garrett and Eliza exchanged a look that communicated an entire conversation without words. When? Garrett asked. Tonight, after dark. Can't be too visible about this, or Dunn will hear before we're ready. Henderson moved toward the door, then paused. Fair warning, some folks are still afraid. Some think you're reckless, and some think your wife's a troublemaker who's going to get good men killed. What do you think? Eliza asked. Henderson smiled grimly. I think troublemakers are exactly what this territory needs. See you tonight. After he left, Garrett turned to Eliza with an expression caught between excitement and terror. This is it, he said. If we can unite enough ranchers, show coordinated proof of fraud across multiple properties, we might actually have enough to force territorial authorities to investigate. Or Dunn hears about it and destroys all of us before we can organize. Always the optimist. Just realistic. But Eliza was smiling despite herself. We should bring copies of everything. Patterson's ledgers, the timeline of price increases, the list of suspicious transactions. We need to show them it's not just scattered complaints. It's systematic exploitation. They spent the afternoon preparing documentation, organizing evidence, building the case they'd present to the other ranchers. As evening fell and the temperature dropped, Garrett saddled 2 horses while Eliza packed the evidence into saddlebags they could grab quickly if needed. You don't have to come, Garrett said as they prepared to leave. This could get dangerous. If Dunn finds out about a meeting, then he finds out about both of us. Eliza swung into her saddle with the confidence of someone who'd learned to ride out of pure necessity over the past months. We're partners, remember? That means I don't hide while you take all the risk. Partners, Garrett repeated, and again the word sounded like it meant something more than either of them was ready to admit. They rode through the darkness toward Morrison's ranch, keeping to less traveled routes, watching for any sign they were being followed. The night was bitter cold, stars sharp as broken glass overhead. Morrison's ranch house blazed with lamplight when they arrived. 6 horses were already tied outside, more people than Henderson had promised. Inside, the Morrison family's main room was packed with ranchers Eliza recognized from town. Tom Henderson, Robert Morrison and his wife Sarah, the Callahan brothers, old Marcus Whitaker, who'd been ranching this territory longer than anyone. Timothy Patterson was there too, looking terrified but determined. And standing in the corner, watching everything with suspicious eyes, was a woman Eliza had seen at the auxiliary meetings but never spoken to. Catherine Dunn, Horace's younger sister. The room went very quiet when Eliza and Garrett entered. Morrison stepped forward. Before we start, everyone needs to understand the stakes. What we're discussing tonight could ruin all of us if it goes wrong. If anyone's not prepared for that risk, leave now. Nobody moved. All right then. Morrison gestured to the table covered in papers. Let's see what we're dealing with. For the next 2 hours, they shared evidence. Eliza laid out Patterson's private ledgers, explaining the systematic price manipulation. Henderson showed his supply contracts. The Callahan brothers presented shipping records proving their cattle had arrived at full weight, despite buyers claiming otherwise. Whitaker brought loan documents from Dunn's bank showing interest rates that had tripled without warning. The pattern was undeniable. Across every ranch, every contract, every transaction, Horace Dunn's fingerprints were everywhere, squeezing profit from struggling families who had nowhere else to turn. "It's not just business," Sarah Morrison said quietly, studying the evidence. "It's coordinated theft. He's been stealing from all of us for years. Question is what we do about it," one of the Callahan brothers said. "We all know Dunn owns the local officials. Taking this to county authorities is pointless." "We go higher," Eliza said. "Territorial legislature, Federal Land Commission, Cattle Association headquarters in Denver. We document everything, submit it through official channels Dunn doesn't control." "That takes time," Whitaker growled. "Months, maybe longer. How many of us can survive that long with Dunn actively working to destroy us?" "We help each other survive," Garrett said. "Share supplies, trade labor, pool resources so no single family gets crushed alone." "You're talking about forming a cooperative," Morrison said slowly. "Bypassing Dunn's supply chains entirely by trading directly with each other." "And with circuit merchants who don't answer to local authorities," Eliza added. "It'll cost more initially, but it breaks Dunn's economic stranglehold. It also makes us all targets," Henderson pointed out. "Right now, Dunn's focused on destroying the Vales as an example. We do this, we're all in his crosshairs." "We're already in his crosshairs," Sarah Morrison countered. "We've just been too afraid to admit it. At least this way we're fighting back instead of dying slowly." Catherine Dunn, who'd been silent until now, finally spoke. Her voice was cold, controlled. "You're all making a mistake. My brother doesn't lose. He spent 20 years building his position. You think some ledgers and coordinated complaints will bring him down?" "Why are you even here?" one of the Callahan brothers demanded. "You're his family. I'm here because I'm tired of watching him destroy this territory in the name of profit." Catherine's hands clenched. "I'm tired of being related to a man who thinks power means crushing anyone who won't kneel. But I'm also not naive. Horace doesn't just have money. He has connections, leverage, and absolutely no conscience about using both." "Then help us," Eliza said. "You know how he operates. You know his weaknesses." "He doesn't have weaknesses. That's the problem." Catherine stood, paced to the window. "But he does have pressure points, things he cares about protecting, his reputation in Denver, his contracts with Eastern cattle buyers, his position on the Territorial Business Council. If we expose his fraud publicly enough, loud enough, he can't just bury it locally," Garrett said, understanding dawning. "Exactly. He can control Blackstone Ridge. He can't control the entire territory." Catherine turned back to face them. "But you need more than evidence. You need witnesses willing to testify publicly. You need media coverage. You need to make enough noise that ignoring it becomes more expensive than investigating it." Timothy spoke up, his voice shaking but clear. "I can testify. About the ledgers, the price manipulation, everything I saw working for Patterson." "That's suicide," Henderson said bluntly. "Dunn will destroy you." "He's already destroying my family. My mother can't afford medicine because supply costs keep climbing." Timothy's jaw set stubbornly. "At least this way the destruction means something." One by one, others committed. Henderson would testify about fraudulent cattle sales. Whitaker would expose the bank loan manipulation. Sarah Morrison would speak about intimidation tactics used against families who questioned Dunn's practices. By midnight, they'd formed a plan. Document everything. Submit formal complaints through territorial channels. Coordinate with a Denver newspaper that had been investigating frontier business practices. Create enough public pressure that Dunn couldn't simply make the problem disappear. "This is going to get ugly," Morrison warned as people prepared to leave. "Dunn's going to retaliate hard and fast. Everyone needs to be ready." "How ready?" one of the Callahans asked. "Armed, vigilant, expecting sabotage, intimidation, maybe worse." Morrison's expression was grim. "We're not just fighting a corrupt businessman anymore. We're fighting someone who sees this territory as his personal kingdom. Kings don't give up power willingly." The group dispersed into the darkness, each family heading home through different routes to avoid being tracked. Garrett and Eliza rode back to their ranch in silence, both processing what they'd just committed to. The temperature had dropped even further, their breath fogging in the starlight. "We just started a war," Garrett finally said. "We were already at war. We just got reinforcements." "Eliza." He pulled his horse to a stop, turned to face her. "What we're doing, it's not just dangerous for us anymore. Those people back there, they're following our lead. If this goes wrong, their blood is on our hands." And if we do nothing, they die slowly under Dunn's boot anyway. Eliza held his gaze. I know the risk. I know what we're asking people to sacrifice. But sometimes the only way to stop drowning is to fight your way to the surface, even if the fight might kill you.
Where did you learn to be this fearless? I'm not fearless. I'm terrified every single day. Her voice dropped. But I learned a long time ago that fear is just another thing trying to control you, and I'm done letting anything control me. Not fear, not men like Dunn, not even my own doubts.
Garrett stared at her like he was seeing something he'd been blind to before. When you answered my advertisement, I thought I was getting a practical partner for a failing ranch. I didn't realize I was getting someone who'd turn into the most dangerous person I'd ever met. Dangerous how? Dangerous like you make me believe we might actually win this. The way he said it made Eliza's heart do something complicated and inappropriate. They were supposed to be partners, business associates, two people bound by necessity and paperwork, not by whatever was building between them every time their eyes met. But sitting there in the frozen darkness, close enough to feel the warmth of him despite the cold, Eliza couldn't pretend anymore that their arrangement was purely practical. We should get home, she said, breaking the moment before it became something neither of them could take back. Morning comes early. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Charged. Waiting. The ranch looked peaceful when they arrived. Lamplight they'd left burning in the window, casting golden squares onto the snow. For a moment, Eliza let herself imagine this was actually home. Not just a refuge from her past, but a future she was choosing. Then she saw the shadows moving near the barn. Garrett, she said quietly, urgently. He saw them too. 4 men, maybe 5, trying to move quietly through the darkness. Get in the house, Garrett said, already reaching for his rifle. Bar the door. Not a chance. Before he could argue, she'd pulled her own rifle from its saddle holster, the one Garrett had insisted she learn to use after the first fence burning. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, he muttered. You're welcome. They dismounted quickly, quietly, using the horses as cover while they approached the barn. The intruders were focused on something inside, their voices low and urgent. Just the horses. Make it look like thieves. Dunn said make it hurt. Garrett stepped into the barn entrance, rifle raised. Drop whatever you're holding and get out. The 4 men spun around. Eliza recognized 2 of them from Dunn's office. Hired muscle who made their living intimidating people too poor to fight back. The scarred man from the fence burning smiled. Now, Vale, we're just here to deliver another message. Deliver it and leave. Message is this. You got one more chance to sell. Dunn's offering 20 cents on the dollar for your property. You take it, or next time we come back, we burn more than fences. Tell Dunn I'd rather burn the whole ranch myself than give him the satisfaction. The scarred man's smile turned ugly. Your funeral. He nodded to his companions. One of them threw something into the hay. Eliza saw the flash of a match, smelled kerosene. The barn erupted in flames. Garrett shouted, rushing forward to fight the fire, but it spread too fast. Someone had soaked multiple areas with accelerant. The horses screamed in terror. Get the animals out, Garrett yelled. Eliza threw open the stall doors while Garrett hauled panicked horses toward the exit. Smoke filled the space, choking, blinding. The hired men had already fled, their laughter echoing in the darkness. It took 30 desperate minutes to get all the livestock out safely. By then, the barn was engulfed, flames roaring into the night sky. They could only stand and watch as 30 years of shelter and storage burned to ash. When the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks, Garrett sank to his knees in the snow. Eliza knelt beside him, put her hand on his shoulder. We're alive. The animals are safe. We can rebuild. With what? His voice was raw, broken. We don't have money for lumber, don't have supplies, don't have... He stopped, jaw working. My father built that barn with his own hands. It was the first thing he constructed when he claimed this land. And I just watched it burn. You didn't just watch it burn, you saved everything that mattered. Eliza tightened her grip. The barn was wooden nails. The ranch is more than that. It's the land, the animals, the fight, us. Garrett looked at her, his face lit by dying flames, and something broke open in his expression. I can't lose this, he said hoarsely. I can't lose what my father died building.
Can't lose what we're fighting for. Can't... He stopped, and when he continued, his voice was barely a whisper. Can't lose you. The admission hung between them like the smoke in the air, dangerous, impossible to ignore. You're not going to lose me, Eliza said. You're not going to lose this ranch. We're going to survive this the same way we've survived everything else. Together. How can you be so sure?
Because I've already lost everything once. I know what that feels like. This? She gestured at the burning barn. This is just Dunn being afraid. And when men like him get afraid, they get sloppy. You think burning our barn was a mistake? I think it was desperate. He's trying to break us before we can organize the other ranchers, which means our plan is working. Eliza helped Garrett to his feet. He wouldn't be trying this hard to destroy us if he wasn't scared. Garrett looked at the ruins of the barn, then at the house still standing, then at Eliza standing beside him covered in ash and smoke, but refusing to break. You know what the worst part is? He said. What? I married you for practical reasons, because I needed help saving this ranch, because I was drowning and desperate. He met her eyes. And somewhere along the way, you stopped being practical and started being... He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Eliza felt it too. The way their arrangement had shifted into something neither of them had planned for. The way proximity and partnership and fighting the same battles had turned strangers into something dangerously close to real. We should check the house, she said, breaking the moment because examining it was terrifying. Make sure they didn't set more fires. They searched every room, every corner, finding no additional damage. The house had been spared, probably because Dunn wanted them alive to suffer, not dead and martyred. As dawn broke over the mountain ridges, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscene given the circumstances, Garrett and Eliza stood on the porch surveying the damage in daylight. The barn was completely gone, just charred timber and ash. Fence sections they'd repaired were damaged again from people trampling through. Supply stores they'd kept in the barn were destroyed. We need to get word to the others, Garrett said. Let them know Dunn's escalating. This wasn't just intimidation. This was attempted destruction. Which means we need to move faster than planned. Eliza's mind was already working through revised timelines. Get documentation submitted within days, not weeks. Force Dunn to respond before he can destroy all of us individually. That's risky. Everything's risky now. Garrett started to respond, but hoofbeats interrupted, multiple riders approaching fast. They both tensed, expecting more of Dunn's men. Instead, it was Tom Henderson leading a group of ranchers from last night's meeting. Henderson dismounted, took one look at the destroyed barn, and swore viciously. We saw the smoke from Morrison's place, he said. Figured Dunn made his move. More than one move, Garrett's voice was tight. Tried to burn us out completely. We barely saved the livestock. The other ranchers spread out, examining the damage with grim expressions. This changes things, Morrison said. Dunn's not going to wait while we build a legal case. He's going to destroy everyone who stood up to him before we can organize properly. Then we don't wait either, Eliza said. We take what evidence we have, submit it immediately, and make enough noise that Dunn can't silence all of us before authorities respond. That's suicide, one of the Callahan brothers protested. We're not ready, Achetates. We'll never be ready, Garrett interrupted. Dunn will make sure of that. But if we move now, coordinate our complaints, get everything on record simultaneously. He can't destroy the evidence if it's already in official hands, Henderson finished. Smart. Risky as hell, but smart. Sarah Morrison stepped forward. I can ride to Denver. I have family there, people who won't ask questions about why I'm arriving suddenly. I can deliver documentation to the Territorial Commission personally. I'll handle the newspaper contacts, Catherine Dunn said, appearing from the back of the group. I know which reporters are already investigating frontier corruption. Get them the story, and they'll run with it. We'll need signed affidavits from everyone willing to testify, Eliza said. Detailed accounts of fraud, dates, amounts, everything we can document. I'll organize that, Timothy offered. I know Patterson's filing system, where he keeps all the contracts and receipts. The plan came together fast. Too fast, maybe, but desperation had a way of forcing clarity. Within 2 hours, they divided responsibilities. Sarah Morrison would leave for Denver that afternoon. Catherine would contact newspaper allies. Timothy would gather additional documentation from Patterson's store when the opportunity arose. The rest would prepare sworn statements and coordinate their official complaints. One more thing, Whitaker said as people prepared to leave. We need to protect each other's properties. Dunn's going to keep attacking anyone who won't back down. We should organize watches, shared patrols, make sure no family faces his men alone. Agreed, Garrett said. Starting tonight, no ranch goes unwatched. As the group dispersed to begin preparations, Henderson pulled Garrett aside while Eliza was distracted organizing paperwork. You know what you're asking people to risk, right? Henderson said quietly. Homes, lives, everything they've built. I know. And you're willing to carry that weight if it goes wrong? Garrett looked at the destroyed barn, then at Eliza standing in the ruins with ash in her hair and determination in every line of her body. I'm willing to fight until there's nothing left to fight with, he said. Because that woman over there taught me that surrender is just another way of dying slowly, and I'm done dying. Henderson followed his gaze, understanding dawning. This stopped being about the ranch somewhere along the way, didn't it? I don't know what you mean. Sure you don't. Henderson clapped him on the shoulder. For what it's worth, Vale, I've known you 10 years. Never seen you look at anything the way you look at her. If we're going to war, at least you've got something worth fighting for. Before Garrett could respond, Eliza called them back over to review the timeline one more time. They worked until noon, finalizing plans, making contingencies, preparing for every scenario they could imagine. When everyone finally left, Garrett and Eliza stood alone amid the wreckage of their barn, exhausted and filthy and strangely energized. We did it, Eliza said. We actually organized a coordinated response. We started something we can't stop, Garrett countered. There's no going back now. Good. I never learned to walk backwards anyway. Despite everything, despite the destruction, the danger, the enormous risk, Garrett laughed. Actually laughed. The sound rough and unpracticed, but real. What? Eliza asked. Nothing. Just realizing that answering my advertisement might have been the smartest thing I ever did. Might have been? Definitely was. The moment stretched between them, charged with things neither of them quite dared to name. Then Garrett cleared his throat, stepped back, put professional distance between them. We should inventory what supplies survived the fire. Figure out what we need most urgently. Right. Practical. Good idea. They spent the rest of the day sorting through wreckage, salvaging what they could, making lists of losses for insurance claims they'd probably never collect. As evening fell, they ate a cold dinner. Neither of them had energy left for cooking, and reviewed the next day's priorities. Sarah Morrison leaves for Denver tomorrow, Eliza said, checking her notes. Catherine contacts the newspapers. Timothy starts gathering additional documentation. And we wait, Garrett said. Hardest part. The hardest part is surviving whatever Dunn does next. As if summoned by her words, a rifle shot cracked through the evening air. They both dove for cover, Garrett pushing Eliza behind the heavy table as glass shattered from the window. 2 more shots followed, spaced deliberately, not trying to kill, trying to terrorize. Then silence. Garrett crawled to the broken window, carefully peered out. They're gone. Just wanted to remind us they can reach us any time. Eliza's hands were shaking, not from fear, from rage. He's going to keep doing this every night, every day, until we break or die. Then we don't give him the satisfaction of either. They spent that night taking turns on watch, rifles loaded, every sound making them jump. The frontier had always been dangerous, weather, wildlife, isolation. But this was different. This was human malice with unlimited resources and no conscience. As Eliza sat by the window during her watch shift, staring into darkness that might hide threats, she thought about Philadelphia, about Richard Pemberton and his easy cruelty, about how she'd run from one kind of destruction straight into another, but this time felt different. This time, she wasn't running. She was standing still long enough to fight back, and she wasn't alone. Behind her, Garrett slept fitfully on the couch, his rifle within arm's reach. Even in sleep, he looked ready for battle. She wondered if he'd always been like this, wound tight, prepared for disaster, or if the frontier had made him that way. Wondered if she was becoming the same kind of dangerous. When dawn finally broke, they were both exhausted but alive. No more attacks had come during the night, but the psychological damage was done. They couldn't relax, couldn't rest, couldn't trust that any moment was safe.
This is what he wants, Eliza said over weak coffee. They were rationing everything now. He wants us too tired and scared to fight effectively. It's working, only if we let it. Garrett looked at her with something between admiration and exasperation. Do you ever just admit when things are terrible? Things being terrible is exactly when you need to pretend they're not. Fake confidence long enough and sometimes it becomes real. Where did you learn that? Eliza hesitated, then decided honesty was worth the risk. My mother, she worked as a seamstress in Philadelphia, raised me alone after my father died. We were poor. The kind of poor where pretending everything's fine is the only defense you've got. She taught me to smile while we were starving, to walk with my head high while wearing clothes I'd mended 100 times. She stared into her coffee. She died thinking she'd failed me. Never knew I took every lesson she taught and used it to survive things she couldn't have imagined. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. My father was similar. Taught me that frontier men don't complain, don't quit, don't show weakness. Then he worked himself to death trying to prove it. His voice went rough. I used to think that was strength. Now I think maybe it was just fear dressed up in stubbornness. What changed your mind? You. He met her eyes across the table. You're stubborn as hell, but you're not afraid to admit when things are hard. Not afraid to ask for help. Not afraid to fight in ways that don't require bleeding out quietly to prove a point. I'm afraid of plenty of things. But you do them anyway. That's braver than pretending you're never scared. The conversation was interrupted by hoofbeats. Again, they both grabbed weapons, ready for another attack. But the rider who appeared was Sarah Morrison, her horse lathered from hard riding, her face grim. Change of plans, she said without dismounting. Can't go to Denver. Why not? Eliza demanded. Because Dunn's men are watching the roads. Morrison spotted them positioned on every route out of the territory. They're not letting anyone leave who might be carrying evidence. Garrett swore. He's locked down the whole area. How did he know? Eliza asked. We were careful last night. Someone talked, Sarah said flatly, or someone followed us. Either way, Dunn knows we're organizing and he's making sure nothing leaves this territory that might hurt him. Eliza's mind raced through alternatives. What about sending documents by freight? Hide them in legitimate cargo? Dunn controls the freight companies. Mail service? Routed through a post office where Dunn's cousin is postmaster. Telegraph? Sarah shook her head. Already tried. Line's been cut. Repair crews say it'll be weeks before service is restored. They were trapped, completely isolated from any help outside Dunn's reach. This isn't just intimidation anymore, Garrett said. This is a siege. Then we break the siege, Eliza replied. There has to be a way out of this territory that Dunn doesn't control. Not by road, not by freight, not by wire. Sarah's frustration was palpable. He's thought of everything. Eliza stared at the maps on the wall, territory maps Garrett's father had marked with trails and routes decades ago. Her eyes caught on something she'd noticed before but hadn't really considered. What about the mountain pass? Garrett followed her gaze. That's a winter route. Nobody uses it this time of year. Too dangerous. Exactly. Which means Dunn won't have it watched, because it's suicide. The pass is narrow, exposed to avalanches, blocked by snow half the time. My father only used it in emergencies. This is an emergency. Sarah looked between them. You're seriously suggesting someone ride through mountain wilderness in winter to reach Denver? I'm suggesting it's our only option if we want to get evidence out before Dunn destroys us all. Garrett stood, crossed to the map, traced the route with his finger. It's 3 days of hard riding under perfect conditions. In winter? With snow? Could be 5, maybe 6 days. That's assuming no storms, no avalanches, no getting lost. Can it be done? Maybe. If the rider knows the route, travels light, and gets lucky. Then I'll do it, Eliza said. Both Garrett and Sarah stared at her. Absolutely not, Garrett said immediately. You've never ridden that terrain. Hell, you barely learned to ride a few months ago. Which is exactly why Dunn won't expect it. He's watching for experienced riders on known routes. He's not watching for a woman who just learned to ride taking a path nobody uses. Because it's insane. So is everything else we're doing. Garrett grabbed her shoulders, forced her to look at him. Eliza, listen to me. That pass has killed experienced frontiersmen. If you get caught in a storm, if your horse goes lame, if you take one wrong turn,
you die. Alone. Frozen. Nobody would even find your body until spring thaw. I know the risks. No, you don't. You think you do, but you don't understand how fast the mountains can kill you. Then come with me. Show me the route. We'll do it together. And leave the ranch undefended? Leave the other families without coordination? Garrett's grip tightened. We need to split up. One of us goes, one stays. But it can't be you going. I won't allow it. Eliza's eyes went cold. You won't allow it? I'm not your property, Garrett. I'm your partner. Which means I get equal say in decisions that affect both of us. Partnership doesn't mean I watch you commit suicide. And it doesn't mean you get to protect me by risking yourself instead. They stood locked in stubborn deadlock, neither willing to yield. Sarah cleared her throat. Much as I'm enjoying watching you two argue like an old married couple, we're wasting time. How about neither of you goes? They both turned to her. Send someone else, Sarah continued. Someone who knows the mountains, isn't actively targeted by Dunn, and has experience with winter travel. Like who? Garrett demanded. Like Marcus Whitaker. He's been crossing those mountains for 40 years, knows every trail, every shortcut, every place to shelter, and Dunn's focused on younger, more active threats, might not watch an old man as carefully. It made sense. Eliza hated that it made sense because part of her genuinely wanted to be the one to make the dangerous journey. Wanted to prove she was brave enough, strong enough, worthy of being here. But being brave didn't mean being stupid. Could Whitaker do it? Garrett asked, at his age. He's tougher than men half his years, Sarah said. And he's got family in Denver, built-in reason to travel that wouldn't raise suspicion if someone saw him leaving. The plan shifted again, adapting to new circumstances. Sarah rode back to contact Whitaker, while Eliza and Garrett prepared documentation he could carry. Lightweight, waterproof packages of affidavits, evidence, and instructions for who to contact in Denver. As they worked, the tension from their argument lingered. I'm not trying to control you, Garrett finally said, breaking the silence. I'm trying to keep you alive. I know, but you have to trust that I'm capable of making my own decisions about risk. I do trust you. He stopped, struggling with words. I can't lose you, and I'm terrified that fighting Dunn means losing everything again. Eliza set down the papers she'd been organizing. You're not going to lose me, but you also can't protect me from every danger. We're in this together, which means we both take risks. We both fight. We both decide what we're willing to sacrifice. Even if that sacrifice is your life? Even then, Garrett looked at her like she'd gutted him. That's not acceptable. It's reality. Same reality you're living with. Same risks you take every day. Eliza moved closer. You can't ask me to hide while you fight. That's not partnership. That's not... She stopped, realizing she'd almost said something neither of them was ready for. That's not what? Garrett's voice was quiet, dangerous. Nothing. Forget it. Eliza... He caught her hand, gentle but insistent. Finish the sentence. She met his eyes, saw everything she'd been trying to ignore reflected back. The way their arrangement had become something real, something terrifying, something neither of them had planned for. That's not how you treat someone you care about, she said finally. You don't hide them away and expect them to wait safely while you face everything alone. You stand beside them. You trust them. Garrett kissed her. Not gently, not tentatively. Like he'd been holding back for months and something had finally broken loose. Eliza's first instinct was to pull away, remind him about their arrangement, their agreement to keep things practical and uncomplicated. Instead, she kissed him back. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. That was probably a mistake, he said. Definitely a mistake. Changes everything. Everything. Neither of them moved away. We should talk about this, Eliza said. Later. After we survive Dunn. After we save the ranch. After everything's settled. And if we don't survive? Garrett's arms tightened around her. Then at least we'll know we felt something real before the end. It was the most honest, least practical thing either of them had said since their arrangement began, and it made Eliza terrified in ways burning barns and threatening men never could. Because losing the ranch was survivable. Losing each other? That might actually break something neither of them could rebuild. Outside, clouds gathered over the mountain peaks, heavy with the promise of snow. The siege was tightening, the war was escalating, and somewhere between survival and surrender, two people who'd started as strangers were becoming something worth fighting for. The storm hit 48 hours after Marcus Whitaker disappeared into the mountain pass, with their evidence wrapped in oilskin and prayers they were too practical to speak aloud. It came down from the peaks like something alive and angry, turning the world into a howling wall of white that made visibility past the porch impossible. Garrett stood at the window watching snow pile against the fences. His jaw clenched so tight Eliza could hear his teeth grinding from across the room. "He'll make it," she said, not because she believed it, but because someone needed to say it. He's 73 years old, riding through the worst pass in the territory during the worst storm we've seen in 5 years. Garrett's voice was flat, dead. "He's not making it." "You don't know that. I know the mountains. I know what they do to men half his age with twice his strength." He turned from the window, and Eliza saw the guilt eating him alive. "I sent him to die because we were too afraid to go ourselves. You sent him because he was the only one with the skills and cover story to have a chance. This isn't on you. Everything's on me. This ranch, this fight, everyone who's risking their lives because I was too stubborn to just sell to Dunn and walk away." Eliza crossed the room, grabbed his face in both hands, forced him to look at her. "Listen to me. Marcus Whitaker is a grown man who made his own choice, just like all of us made ours. You didn't force anyone into this fight. You gave them a chance to fight back instead of dying on their knees. That's not something to feel guilty about. Even if they die standing up? Especially then." Outside, the wind screamed like it was trying to tear the house apart. The temperature had dropped so low that frost formed on the inside of the windows. Despite the fire, they kept burning constantly. They'd moved the surviving livestock into the partially sheltered areas near what remained of the barn, covered them with every tarp and blanket they could spare, and hoped it would be enough. The isolation was complete now. No one could travel in this weather. No supplies could get through. No help could arrive. They were alone with their dwindling resources, and the certainty that Horace Dunn was somewhere warm and comfortable, waiting for winter to finish what his hired men had started. "We need to check on the animals," Garrett said, pulling on every layer he owned. "They won't survive the night without fresh bedding and whatever shelter we can improvise." "I'll come with you." "No. Stay inside where it's warm." Eliza was already pulling on her coat. "We've had this argument. You don't get to protect me from weather any more than you get to protect me from Dunn. We work together or we don't work at all." Something that might have been affection flickered across his face despite the circumstances. "Stubborn. You knew that when you married me." They roped themselves together before stepping outside. Standard procedure in blizzards this bad, because getting separated meant death. The wind hit like a physical blow, stealing breath, stinging exposed skin. Snow had drifted waist-deep in places, making every step a battle. The animals huddled together in miserable clumps, ice forming on their coats. Garrett and Eliza worked by feel more than sight, spreading fresh straw, repositioning tarps, checking for injuries or signs of frostbite. It was brutal, exhausting work that left them both shaking and numb. When they finally stumbled back inside 2 hours later, Eliza couldn't feel her feet and Garrett's face was an alarming shade of gray. "Fireplace. Now," she ordered, already stripping off his frozen outer layers with hands that barely functioned. "We need to warm you up before hypothermia sets in." "I'm fine." "You're turning blue. Sit down and shut up." She'd learned basic cold weather survival from necessity over the past months. The frontier had a way of teaching lessons fast or burying you. Got Garrett positioned near the fire, wrapped in every blanket they owned, forced hot coffee into him until color started returning to his skin. "Your turn," he said once he could speak without his teeth chattering. Eliza hadn't realized how cold she'd gotten until she stopped moving. The shaking started then, violent and uncontrollable. Garrett pulled her against him, sharing body heat, rubbing circulation back into her frozen hands. They sat like that for a long time, pressed together in front of the fire, listening to the storm try to kill them through walls and glass. "This is what my father faced," Garrett said quietly. "The winter he died. Storm exactly like this one. He went out to check the herd and never came back. We found him 3 days later, frozen 50 yards from the barn. He'd gotten turned around in the whiteout, walked in circles until he collapsed." Eliza tightened her grip on him. "I'm sorry. Everyone said it was a tragic accident, bad luck, wrong place, wrong time. His voice went hard. But I always wondered if it was more than that. If maybe he was just so tired of fighting, the weather, the debt, the endless struggle, that some part of him gave up before the cold took him. You think he chose to die? I think he stopped choosing to live. There's a difference. Eliza understood that difference better than she wanted to admit. There had been nights in Philadelphia, after everything fell apart with Richard Pemberton, when she'd stood at her boarding house window contemplating how easy it would be to just stop. Stop fighting. Stop running. Stop trying to survive in a world that seemed designed to grind her down. She'd chosen differently. Chosen the frontier, the unknown, the desperate advertisement from a stranger who needed help as much as she needed escape. Chosen Garrett, though she hadn't known that's what she was doing at the time. Your father would be proud of you, she said. You're still fighting, still choosing to live, still protecting what he built. I'm destroying what he built. Every decision I make seems to bring us closer to losing everything, or closer to winning everything. We won't know which until we're on the other side. Garrett pulled back enough to look at her, something raw and desperate in his expression. What if there is no other side? What if Dunn wins and we lose the ranch and everyone who trusted us gets destroyed because we were too stubborn to quit? Then at least we tried, at least we fought, at least we… Eliza stopped, realizing what she was about to say. At least we what? At least we had this. Whatever this is between us, even if it's only for a little while. Garrett's hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheek. This stopped being temporary the moment you walked into Dunn's office with those ledgers. Maybe before that. Maybe the first time you looked at me like I wasn't just a desperate rancher, but a person worth fighting beside. When did I do that? Every single day since you arrived. The kiss was slower this time, gentler. Less about desperation and more about the terrifying realization that what had started as a practical arrangement had become something neither of them knew how to name, but both of them needed more than their next breath. When they pulled apart, the storm was still raging outside, but somehow the world felt smaller, safer. Like maybe they could survive anything as long as they didn't have to survive it alone. We should sleep, Garrett said, though neither of them moved. Going to be a long night. Every night's a long night now. Fair point. They stayed by the fire, wrapped in blankets and each other, listening to the wind scream threats they refused to acknowledge. Somewhere past midnight, Eliza fell into fitful sleep, dreaming of mountains and ice and Marcus Whitaker's frozen body lost in snow that would bury him until spring. She woke to gray dawn light and the eerie silence that meant the storm had finally passed. Garrett was already up, standing at the window again, his expression unreadable. How bad? Eliza asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the cold that had crept in overnight. Bad. Snow's drifted 6 feet in places, took out part of the north fence completely, lost at least 2 cattle that I can see from here. The others? Won't know until we dig our way out there. They spent the morning doing exactly that, digging paths, checking animals, assessing damage. It could have been worse. It was still terrible. 3 cattle dead from exposure. Fences collapsed under snow weight. The makeshift barn shelter had partially caved in, requiring desperate repairs with lumber they couldn't afford to replace. By noon, they were both exhausted again, running on coffee and stubbornness and very little else. That's when the riders appeared. Not Dunn's men this time. Tom Henderson, leading 4 other ranchers, all of them looking as haggard as Eliza felt. Roads are starting to clear, Henderson said without dismounting. Thought we'd check if you 2 survived. Barely, Garrett admitted. You? Morrison lost half his herd. Callahan brothers had their roof cave in. Whole families staying in their barn now. Whitaker's place. Henderson's expression went grim. Nobody's heard from Marcus since before the storm. Eliza's stomach dropped. You think he didn't make it? I think if he made it through the pass before the storm hit, he's in Denver by now. If the storm caught him in the mountains… Henderson didn't need to finish. So we wait, Garrett said. We wait. In the meantime, we've got bigger problems. Dunn's using the storm as cover to move on properties while people are vulnerable. Already sent purchase offers to Morrison and the Callahans. Pennies on the dollar, take it, or face foreclosure. They can't foreclose in winter, Eliza protested. There are laws. Dunn doesn't care about laws. He's betting families are desperate enough after storm damage that they'll sell rather than fight. And he's probably right about some of them. Garrett swore. How many are considering it? 2 families for sure. Maybe 3. Can't blame them. They're staring at total loss if they try to hold out until spring. Can we help them? Pool resources? Share supplies? With what resources? Henderson's laugh was bitter. We're all drowning, Vale. The storm just made everyone realize how close to the edge we've been living. Eliza's mind raced through possibilities, contingencies, desperate plans. What if we don't wait for help from Denver? What if we take the evidence we still have directly to territorial authorities ourselves? Roads are barely passable, one of the other ranchers pointed out, and Dunn's still watching every route out. Then we make him think we're not leaving, make him comfortable, then move fast when he's not expecting it. Henderson studied her with something between respect and concern. You're talking about a diversion. Make Dunn think we've given up while someone slips out with evidence. Exactly. That's dangerous. If Dunn figures out he's been played, he's already trying to destroy us. At least this way we're fighting back instead of just waiting to die. The ranchers exchanged looks. Eliza could see the calculation in their eyes, weighing risk against possible reward, survival against surrender. I'll do it, Garrett said suddenly. I'll be the one who rides out. Make it look like I'm going for supplies, take the back routes, get to the territorial office before Dunn realizes I'm gone. No, Eliza said immediately. If you disappear, Dunn will know something's wrong. He's watching this ranch specifically because of what we started. But if I leave, if it looks like I'm abandoning you after the storm, running back east because frontier life got too hard, that's exactly what he'd expect from a woman who married for convenience. Garrett looked like she'd stabbed him. You want to pretend you're leaving me? I want to give Dunn a story he'll believe while I carry evidence to people who can actually use it. Absolutely not. I won't. It's not your decision, Eliza interrupted. It's mine, and I'm making it. Henderson watched their argument with barely concealed amusement. You two fight like this about everything? Only the important things, Eliza said, without taking her eyes off Garrett. Which is why he needs to understand that I'm doing this whether he approves or not. Garrett's hands clenched into fists. You don't know the territory? Don't know the routes? Don't? Then draw me a map. Give me instructions. But don't tell me I can't do this because I'm new to the frontier. I've survived everything this place has thrown at me so far. I'll survive this too. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Finally, Henderson cleared his throat. Much as I hate to interrupt, we need to decide this fast. Weather window won't last long. If we're doing this, it needs to be soon. Garrett looked at Eliza like he was trying to memorize her face. If something happens to you, then you keep fighting. Keep the ranch alive. Keep everyone organized. Make sure my sacrifice actually means something. She softened slightly. But nothing's going to happen. I'm tougher than I look. I know exactly how tough you are. That's what terrifies me. They spent the next 3 hours planning. Henderson would spread word that Mrs. Vale had decided frontier life wasn't worth the hardship, was returning east after the devastating storm. Garrett would make a public show of being abandoned, betrayed, broken by both weather and wife. Meanwhile, Eliza would take the southern route that skirted Dunn's watched roads, carrying duplicate evidence and sworn statements to the Territorial Commission in the capital. 3 days hard riding if weather holds, Henderson said, marking the route on a map. 4 if you hit problems. You'll need to avoid towns where Dunn has connections. Stick to smaller settlements where strangers don't draw attention. What about supplies? Eliza asked. Travel light, take money for what you need, but don't flash it around. And for the love of everything, if you run into trouble, run. Don't try to fight. Just get the evidence to the capital and let authorities handle the rest. As the planning session broke up and the ranchers prepared to leave, Henderson pulled Garrett aside one more time. You know this is probably suicide, right? Sending her out alone with Dunn, actively looking for anyone moving against him? I know, Garrett said quietly. I also know she'll do it with or without my help. At least this way she's got maps and supplies and people watching her back as much as we can. You love her. It wasn't a question. Garrett didn't answer for a long moment. Then, doesn't matter what I feel if she's dead. Matters more than you think. Gives her a reason to survive beyond just winning the fight. After everyone left, Garrett and Eliza stood in the ransacked remains of their home. Furniture sold for supply money, rooms stripped bare, everything sacrificed to the fight against Dunn, and faced what they were actually about to do. I leave tomorrow morning, Eliza said. Early, before anyone's watching. I'll have your horse ready. Pack light. Jerky, hardtack, canteen. Nothing that looks valuable. I'll need the evidence. All of it. Garrett retrieved the waterproof packet they'd prepared, handed it to her like he was handing over something infinitely precious, which, Eliza supposed, he was. Their entire case against Dunn, their only real weapon, their last chance to win this fight. If Dunn catches you with this, he won't. Eliza, Garrett's voice cracked. Please, just promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll run if things go wrong. Promise me. She kissed him to stop the words, because if he kept talking, she might lose her nerve entirely. I promise I'll do everything I can to make it back, she said when they broke apart. That's the only promise I can make. They spent that night the way people facing possible death often do, pressed close, memorizing details, saying things they'd been too afraid or too practical to say before. I was drowning when you arrived, Garrett admitted in the darkness. Not just financially. The loneliness was killing me slower than debt, but just as surely. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone who actually cared whether I lived or died. I cared the moment you tried to intimidate me with whiskey and warnings during our first conversation, Eliza said, because you weren't trying to control me. You were trying to be honest about how hard things would be. Nobody had been that honest with me in years. I never expected to need you like this, want you like this. Me neither. If you don't come back when I come back, Eliza corrected. When, not if. When you come back, Garrett amended, I want to renegotiate our arrangement. Oh? What terms did you have in mind? Less practical, more permanent, more... He struggled to find words. More real. Eliza's throat tightened. That sounds suspiciously like a marriage proposal. We're already married. We're already legally bound. I'm talking about actually choosing each other instead of just surviving together. Is there a difference? You know there is. Garrett was quiet for a long time. Then, when you come back, ask me again. See if my answer changes. It wasn't a promise, but it was close enough to give Eliza something to fight for beyond just winning against Dunn. Dawn came too fast and too cold. Eliza dressed in layers, practical clothing that wouldn't draw attention. Garrett had her horse saddled and ready, saddlebags packed with supplies that would have to last 3 days minimum. The evidence packet was sewn into the lining of her coat, invisible unless someone knew exactly where to look. Map's in your pocket, Garrett said, checking her gear one final time. Money's in the false bottom of your right saddlebag. If you run into county sheriff in Coopersville, avoid him. He's on Dunn's payroll. But the deputy, Miller, he's honest. You can trust him if you absolutely need help. Got it. And Eliza? Garrett caught her hand. If anything goes wrong, if you have to choose between bringing back the evidence and staying alive, choose yourself. We can find another way to fight Dunn. I can't find another you. That's the first time you've said something that romantic without immediately taking it back. I'm trying to tell you that you matter more than winning. I know, but we're going to do both anyway. She squeezed his hand. 3 days, 4 maximum. If I'm not back by then, you'll be back. But if I'm not, promise me you won't do anything stupid. Don't try to come after me. Don't get yourself killed trying to rescue someone who might already be dead. That's not a promise I can make. Garrett, no. His voice was iron. You don't get to ask me to abandon you if things go wrong. That's not how this works. We're partners, remember? Which means if you're in trouble, I'm coming. End of discussion. Despite everything, Eliza smiled. Stubborn. You knew that when you married me. She kissed him one last time, longer than she should have, harder than was wise. Like maybe if she memorized the taste of him, it would be enough to carry her through whatever was coming. Then she mounted her horse and rode away from the only home she'd known since leaving Philadelphia. From the man who'd become more important than survival itself, into a frozen landscape that promised nothing except the chance to fight. Behind her, Garrett stood watching until she disappeared from view. Then he went inside and began the performance they'd planned. The abandoned husband, the broken rancher, the man finally defeated by a woman who'd proven too weak for frontier life. It would have been convincing if anyone had looked closely enough to see his hands shaking. Eliza rode for 2 hours before stopping to check her bearings. The map Henderson had drawn was detailed, but the landscape looked different covered in snow. She found her markers anyway, a distinctive rock formation, a lightning-struck tree, the frozen creek that marked the southern boundary. The route took her away from watched roads, through wilderness that saw maybe a dozen travelers per year. It was lonely, exposed, dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with Horace Dunn. But it was also beautiful in that stark way mountains could be, all sharp edges and impossible sky, the kind of landscape that didn't care if you survived it or not. By evening, she'd covered maybe 20 miles, not enough. She'd need to push harder tomorrow if she wanted to reach the capital in 3 days. She made camp in a small cave Henderson had marked, built a tiny fire for warmth but not light. No sense advertising her position. Ate jerky that tasted like leather, drank water that was half ice, and tried not to think about how alone she was. Tried not to think about Garrett waiting at the ranch, wondering if she was already dead. The second day was harder. Snow started falling around noon, not a full storm, but enough to slow her progress and make the trail harder to follow. Her horse stumbled twice in hidden drifts, almost throwing her both times. By the time she stopped for the night, she'd covered maybe 15 miles. Still behind schedule, but alive. Still moving. Still carrying the evidence that could end Horace Dunn's empire. That had to count for something. The third day, everything went wrong. She'd made it past the dangerous section of the route, was maybe 10 miles from the capital, feeling confident enough to relax slightly. That's when the riders appeared. 3 of them, blocking the trail ahead. Not Dunn's obvious hired muscle. These were rougher, dirtier, the kind of men who made their living robbing travelers stupid enough to ride alone. Bandits. Of course, because this trip hadn't been dangerous enough already. "Well, look what we have here," the lead rider said, walking his horse toward her slowly. "Pretty lady traveling all alone." "That's not very safe, miss." Eliza's hand moved toward the rifle in her saddle holster, but the second rider already had his gun drawn. "I wouldn't," he said cheerfully, "unless you want this to get unpleasant." "I don't have anything worth stealing," Eliza said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Just supplies. Basic travel gear. We'll be the judge of that." The leader dismounted, started walking toward her. "Why don't you step down from that horse nice and slow? Let us take a look at what you're carrying." Eliza's mind raced. If they searched her thoroughly, they'd find the evidence, find the money, figure out she was more than just a random traveler. And if they were connected to Dunn at all, even loosely, she was as good as dead. She dismounted slowly, hands visible, trying to look frightened and compliant. "Good girl," the leader said, reaching for her saddlebags. Eliza kicked him in the knee hard enough to hear something crack. While he was stumbling, she grabbed her horse's reins, vaulted back into the saddle, something she'd practiced obsessively over the past months because Garrett had insisted she needed to be able to mount fast in emergencies, and spurred the horse into a full gallop before the other 2 riders could react. Gunshots cracked behind her, but the range was already too far. She rode like demons were chasing her, which essentially they were, pushing her horse to speeds that were dangerous on snow-covered trails, but less dangerous than stopping. The pursuit lasted maybe 10 minutes before the bandits gave up. 3 men chasing 1 woman through wilderness wasn't worth the effort when easier targets existed, but the damage was done. Eliza's horse, pushed too hard on dangerous ground, came up lame a mile later. Not severely, but enough that continuing at speed was impossible. She was 8 miles from the capital with a horse that could barely walk, carrying evidence that could destroy Horace Dunn if she could just get it to the right people. No choice but to continue on foot. She stripped her horse of everything essential, evidence, money, minimal supplies, cached the saddle and gear in a hidden spot she could find later, and started walking. 4 hours later, frozen and exhausted, she stumbled into the capital's outskirts. The Territorial Commission building was closed for the evening, but she found the address Henderson had given her, a boarding house run by a woman named Charlotte Hayes, who apparently helped people in exactly Eliza's situation. Hayes took one look at Eliza's condition and pulled her inside without questions. "You're one of the frontier families fighting Dunn," she said, already heating water for tea. "We've been hearing rumors something was brewing." "It's more than rumors," Eliza managed through chattering teeth. "I have evidence, years of fraud, price manipulation, intimidation. I need to get it to the Territorial Commission first thing tomorrow morning." "You're sure it's solid? Dunn's fought off accusations before, has friends in high places." "It's solid. Signed affidavits from multiple families. Ledgers showing systematic theft. Timeline of coordinated exploitation." Eliza pulled the packet from her coat lining. Everything needed to prove he's been building his empire on fraud. Hayes studied the packet, then Eliza's face, then nodded sharply. My husband's a clerk at the commission. I'll make sure this gets to the right people first thing tomorrow. People who can't be bought by Dunn. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Getting evidence submitted is one thing. Getting action taken is another. Dunn's powerful. This is going to be a fight. Everything's a fight, Eliza said. I'm getting used to it. That night, warm and safe for the first time in days, Eliza let herself imagine Garrett's face when she rode back to the ranch victorious. Imagine telling him they'd won, that Dunn was finished, that they could finally stop fighting and start actually building something together. The fantasy was sweet enough that she almost believed it. The next morning, Hayes's husband took the evidence directly to Commissioner Anthony Walsh, who had a reputation for being incorruptible, mostly because he was independently wealthy enough that bribes meant nothing to him. Walsh reviewed the documentation for 2 hours while Eliza waited in a reception area, every minute feeling like an eternity. When he finally called her in, his expression was grave. Mrs. Vale, this evidence is substantial. If even half of what you've documented is accurate, Horace Dunn has been conducting illegal business practices across 3 territories for years. It's all accurate, sir. We can provide witnesses, additional documentation, testimony from families he's defrauded. I believe you. That's not the problem. Walsh set the papers down carefully. The problem is that launching an official investigation requires approval from the territorial governor, and the governor's re-election campaign was heavily funded by, among others, Horace Dunn. Eliza felt her stomach drop. So nothing will be done. I didn't say that. I said there are complications. Walsh leaned back in his chair. But there are also ways around those complications. If I can build enough public pressure, if newspapers start asking questions, if enough influential people start demanding answers, the governor will have to authorize an investigation regardless of his financial ties. How long will that take? Weeks. Maybe months. We don't have months. Dunn's actively destroying families right now. Every day we wait, more people lose everything. I understand your frustration, Mrs. Vale, but the legal system moves slowly for good reason. We need to build a case that can't be dismissed or buried. That takes time. Eliza stood abruptly. Then I'll create the public pressure myself. Where's the nearest newspaper office? Walsh actually smiled. 2 blocks east. Ask for Daniel Brennan. Tell him I sent you. He's been looking for a story like this for years. Daniel Brennan was a weather journalist who looked like he'd spent his entire career chasing stories people didn't want told. He listened to Eliza's account without interrupting, reviewed the evidence without comment, then sat back with an expression of grim satisfaction. This is front-page material, he said, possibly front page for a week straight if we serialize the revelations properly. Local cattle baron built his empire on fraud and intimidation. People love that story. How fast can you publish? Tomorrow's edition if you're willing to be quoted publicly, day after if you want to remain anonymous. He studied her carefully. Fair warning, if you go public, Dunn will retaliate. He'll come after you, your family, anyone associated with this story. Are you prepared for that? Eliza thought about Garrett waiting at the ranch, thought about the families who'd trusted them to fight, thought about Marcus Whitaker somewhere in the mountains, possibly dead from trying to help them. Publish it tomorrow, she said. Use my name, print everything. You're either very brave or very foolish. Can I be both? Brennan laughed. I'm starting to see why Dunn couldn't just buy you off. All right, Mrs. Vale, let's destroy a corrupt cattle baron together. The story hit the streets the next morning with a headline that pulled no punches. Territory's wealthiest rancher built fortune on fraud and fear, evidence suggests. By noon, the Territorial Commission had been flooded with demands for investigation. By evening, 3 other newspapers had picked up the story. By the following morning, the governor's office was issuing careful statements about reviewing the allegations thoroughly. Eliza watched it unfold from Hayes's boarding house, feeling victory so close she could taste it. Then a telegram arrived from Blackstone Ridge. It was from Tom Henderson, 5 words that made Eliza's blood turn to ice. Dunn moved on ranch. Come now. She was on a horse, borrowed from Hayes at extortionate rental rates, within the hour, riding back toward Blackstone Ridge with her heart in her throat. The route that had taken 3 days of careful travel, she covered in less than 2, pushing the horse to its limits, stopping only when absolutely necessary. She reached the Vale Ranch just after sunset on the second day. What she found made her heart stop completely. The house was still standing, barely. Windows shattered, door hanging from broken hinges, signs of violence everywhere. And in the middle of the destroyed yard, tied to a post like an animal, was Garrett. Eliza was off her horse and running before conscious thought caught up. Garrett's head hung forward, face bruised and bloodied, arms bound behind him around the wooden post. "Garrett!" she gasped, working frantically at the ropes. "Garrett, look at me." He raised his head slowly, and despite the damage, despite the blood and bruises, he smiled. "You came back," he said, voice rough, like he'd been screaming. "Of course I came back, you idiot! What happened? Where's Dunn?" "Gone. For now. Came with 12 men the day after you left. Tore the place apart looking for more evidence. When they didn't find any," he winced, "decided to leave me as a message. Warning to anyone else thinking about fighting back." Eliza got the ropes loose, caught Garrett as he collapsed forward. He was heavier than he looked, dead weight from exhaustion and injury. "Can you stand?" "Give me a minute." She helped him to his feet, supported most of his weight as they stumbled toward the house. Inside was worse, furniture destroyed, papers scattered, everything they'd built together torn apart. But they were alive, both of them, still standing. "Did the evidence reach the commission?" Garrett asked, collapsing onto the one chair still intact. "Published in 3 newspapers, territorial investigations starting, governor's office issuing statements." Eliza knelt beside him, examining his injuries. "We won, Garrett. Or we're about to. Doesn't feel like winning. Winning never does until it's over." She spent the next hour cleaning his wounds, bandaging what she could, trying not to think about how close he'd come to dying alone while she was celebrating victory in the capital. "I should never have left," she said. "You did what needed doing. I left you alone to face Dunn's retaliation. And you made sure that retaliation won't matter because Dunn's empire is crumbling." Garrett caught her hand. "You made it, Eliza. You got the evidence through, got the story published, started the investigation. That's everything we needed. Almost everything. We still need to survive long enough to see Dunn actually brought down." As if summoned by her words, hoofbeats sounded outside again. They both tensed, but the voice that called out was Tom Henderson's. "Vale, Miss Vale! Anyone alive in there?" "Here!" Garrett called back, trying to stand. Henderson burst through the broken door with 4 other ranchers behind him, all armed, all looking ready for war. "Thank the heavens," Henderson breathed. "When we got word Dunn's men had been here, we thought—" He stopped, taking in Garrett's condition. "They did a number on you." "Nothing permanent. Where's Dunn now?" "Holed up in his compound in town. Word is he's gathering his men, preparing for something big. Everyone's terrified he's going to attack all the families who stood against him before the territorial investigation can stop him." "Can he do that?" Eliza asked. "With the newspapers running stories, with official investigations starting, desperate men do desperate things," Henderson said grimly. "And Dunn's smart enough to know his empire's collapsing. He's got maybe days before federal authorities arrive. If he's going to salvage anything, he needs to act now." "Act how?" "Probably try to force everyone who testified to recant, destroy evidence. Maybe kill the people who can testify against him." Henderson met Eliza's eyes. "Which includes both of you." The siege, Eliza realized, wasn't over. It was just beginning its final, most dangerous phase. The ranchers gathered in what remained of the Vale kitchen looked like soldiers preparing for a battle they knew they'd probably lose. Henderson stood near the broken window, keeping watch. The Callahan brothers checked ammunition. Sarah Morrison sharpened a hunting knife with methodical precision. Even Timothy was there, pale and shaking, but holding a rifle like he'd actually use it if necessary. "How many men does Dunn have?" Garrett asked, wincing as Eliza wrapped his ribs. At least 2 were cracked, maybe broken. 20 at his compound, Henderson answered. Maybe more if he's calling in favors from associates in other territories. We've got maybe 15 people willing to fight, and half of them have never fired a gun at anything but deer. So we're outnumbered and outgunned. Eliza tied off the bandage, perhaps tighter than strictly necessary. Nothing new there. Except this time Dunn's not trying to intimidate us into submission, Sarah said without looking up from her knife. He's trying to eliminate us before federal authorities arrive. That's a very different kind of threat. Garrett struggled to his feet despite Eliza's protest. Then we don't sit here waiting to be eliminated. We go to him first. Everyone turned to stare. You want to attack Dunn's compound? One of the Callahans asked incredulously. With 15 people against his private army? I want to end this before more families get destroyed, before Dunn has time to organize a proper assault, before... Garrett stopped, swaying slightly. Eliza caught his arm. Before you collapse from your injuries and bleed out, she finished. Sit down before I tie you to that chair myself. We can't just hide here. Nobody's hiding. We're planning. Eliza forced him back into the chair with more strength than her frame suggested. Henderson, how long before federal authorities actually arrive? Commissioner Walsh sent word they're dispatching marshals immediately. But immediately in government terms means 3 days minimum, maybe 5. And how long before Dunn moves against us? Hours? Maybe less. Henderson's expression was grim. He knows the clock's running out. Every minute that passes is another minute for evidence to spread, for more newspapers to pick up the story, for his political connections to abandon him. He'll move tonight if he's smart. Then we need to move first, Eliza said, but not with violence, with visibility. Everyone looked confused except Garrett, who was starting to understand how his wife's mind worked. You want to make us too public to kill quietly, he said. Exactly. Dunn's been operating through intimidation and shadow violence because frontier justice doesn't ask too many questions about accidents and disappearances. But if we're surrounded by witnesses, if we're visible enough that our deaths would cause public outcry, he can't touch us without making everything worse for himself, Sarah finished. Smart, risky, but smart. How do we make ourselves that visible? Timothy asked. Eliza's mind was already 3 steps ahead. We go into town, all of us, openly. Make ourselves impossible to ignore. File official complaints with the county sheriff. Even though he's on Dunn's payroll, it creates a paper trail. Visit the telegraph office, send messages to every newspaper that's running the story. Make it clear that if anything happens to any of us, everyone will know exactly who's responsible. That puts us right in Dunn's territory, one of the Callahans pointed out. Makes us easier targets, or makes us harder to eliminate without consequences. Eliza looked around the room at exhausted, frightened people who were still somehow standing. We've been fighting Dunn in the shadows, on isolated ranches, through hidden evidence, with secret meetings. That's his territory. But public opinion? That's ours now. The newspapers are already calling him a fraud. The Territorial Commission is investigating. All we have to do is survive long enough for that process to finish. Henderson nodded slowly. Strength in numbers, strength in visibility. I like it. I don't, Garrett said flatly. You're talking about walking into a town Dunn controls, making ourselves targets, and hoping public attention is enough protection. That's not a plan. That's suicide with extra steps. You have a better idea? Yes. We fort up here, armed and ready, wait for the marshals to arrive. And if Dunn attacks before then? If he burns us out the way he burned our barn, what then? Garrett didn't have an answer for that. The group argued for another 20 minutes, tension rising with each passing moment. Finally, Henderson called for a vote. 10 people chose Eliza's plan. 5 wanted to fort up at the ranches. Nobody wanted to run. Then it's settled, Henderson said. We ride into town at first light, all of us together. Make ourselves visible and dare Dunn to do something about it while the whole territory's watching. The ranchers dispersed to gather their families, prepare for what was essentially a siege in reverse. Instead of being attacked in isolation, they'd gather in the most public place possible and force Dunn to either back down or commit violence so public it would destroy whatever remained of his political protection. After everyone left, Eliza and Garrett sat in the wreckage of their home, listening to night sounds and waiting for dawn. This is insane, Garrett said quietly. Most of what we've done is insane. That doesn't make it smart. No, but it makes it necessary. Eliza moved to sit beside him, careful of his injuries. We're out of safe options, Garrett. We've been out of safe options since the moment we decided to fight instead of surrender. All we can do now is choose which kind of danger to face. I just don't want to get you killed because I was too stubborn to sell when I had the chance. You're not getting me killed. Horace Dunn is trying to kill us. There's a difference. She took his hand. And anyway, I'm the one who pushed this fight further than you ever planned. If anyone's responsible for where we are now, It's me. We're both responsible. That's what partnership means. Garrett squeezed her hand. When this is over, if we survive, we need to have a serious conversation about our arrangement. I thought we already renegotiated those terms. We started to. Then everything went to hell. He turned to face her, and despite the bruises and exhaustion, his eyes were clear. I want you to know that whatever happens tomorrow, whatever Dunn does, I don't regret any of this. Not marrying you, not fighting, not... He stopped, struggling with words. Not falling in love with someone I was supposed to keep at professional distance. Eliza's breath caught. They'd danced around the word before, implied it, acted on it, but neither had actually said it out loud. That's the first time you've used that word, she said. I know. Seemed like I should say it at least once in case I don't get another chance. You'll get plenty of chances. We're going to survive this. You can't promise that. Watch me. She kissed him then, gentle because of his injuries but fierce in every other way. When they pulled apart, Garrett rested his forehead against hers. If we do survive, he said, I want to do this properly. Not a practical arrangement, not a marriage of convenience, an actual life together, building something that isn't just about survival. What would that look like? I don't know yet, but I'd like the chance to find out. Then let's make sure we survive long enough to figure it out together. They spent the rest of the night taking turns on watch, neither trusting that Dunn wouldn't attack before dawn. But the hours passed quietly, too quietly, which somehow felt more ominous than violence would have. As first light broke over the mountains, painting the frozen landscape in shades of pink and gold, families started arriving. The Morrisons with their 3 children, the Callahans and their elderly mother, Whitaker's nephew representing his uncle, who still hadn't returned from Denver, Timothy with his sick mother in a wagon, determined that she'd witness what he was fighting for. By the time they rode into Blackstone Ridge, they were 23 people strong, men, women, children, the old and young together. Not an army, just families who'd decided that dying on their feet was better than living on their knees. The town woke to find them gathered in the main square, visible and vocal, and refusing to be ignored. Henderson walked into the sheriff's office first, the rest following. Sheriff Dawson looked up from his desk, recognition and alarm crossing his face simultaneously. Henderson, Vale. His eyes swept the crowd. What's this about? Filing official complaints, Henderson said, placing a stack of papers on the desk. Documenting harassment, property destruction, intimidation, and attempted murder by Horace Dunn and his associates. For the record, Dawson didn't touch the papers. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime. You gonna do your job and investigate, or do we need to wait for federal marshals to handle it? The sheriff's jaw tightened. Everyone in the room knew where his loyalties lay, but everyone also knew that with this many witnesses, this much documentation, and federal attention already focused on the territory, refusing to act was career suicide. I'll look into it, Dawson said finally. See that you do. Henderson left the papers on the desk like a challenge. Next, they visited the telegraph office. The operator, a nervous young woman named Clara, looked terrified when the group walked in. I need to send messages, Eliza said, placing coins on the counter. To the Denver Post, the Territorial Commission, and the Federal Marshal's Office. Can you do that? Mr. Dunn said not to send any messages from the Vale family or their associates. And I'm sure Mr. Dunn pays you well for that loyalty. But I'm paying you for service, and last I checked, the telegraph office is a public utility. Eliza's voice was pleasant, but her eyes were steel. So unless you want to explain to federal investigators why you were refusing service to citizens filing legitimate complaints, I suggest you start typing. Clara looked at the crowd of witnesses, did the math on which side of history she wanted to be on, and started typing. By mid-morning, half the town knew what was happening. By noon, the other half had heard. People gathered in doorways and storefronts, watching the spectacle of families who'd been terrorized for years, finally standing up in broad daylight. Some looked sympathetic, some looked scared. A few looked angry, people whose livelihoods depended on Dunn's goodwill, who saw this public defiance as a threat to their own survival. But nobody could ignore it, which is exactly what Eliza had counted on. Around 1 o'clock, Horace Dunn finally appeared. He walked down Main Street flanked by a dozen armed men dressed like he was heading to a business meeting rather than a confrontation. Calm, controlled, every inch the successful businessman being bothered by unreasonable complaints. The crowd in the square went silent. Dunn stopped maybe 20 feet from where Garrett and Eliza stood at the front of their group. His expression was pleasant, almost amused. "Mrs. Vale," he said, "I heard you'd returned from your trip. Successful journey, I trust." "Very successful, Mr. Dunn. The Territorial Commission was quite interested in the evidence I presented." "Evidence of what exactly?" "Systematic fraud, price manipulation, intimidation, property destruction, attempted murder." Eliza's voice carried across the square. "Years of criminal activity built into every contract you've touched, every deal you've made, every family you've destroyed." Murmurs rippled through the watching crowd. Dunn's smile never wavered. "Those are extraordinary claims. I'm sure you have extraordinary proof. Published in 3 newspapers so far. More picking up the story daily. The territorial governor himself is calling for investigation." Eliza took a step forward. "Your empire is collapsing, Mr. Dunn. This is just you watching it fall. My empire, as you call it, is built on legitimate business and honest contracts. If some families struggled, that's unfortunate, but not criminal. Families don't struggle when you triple their supply costs overnight. They don't struggle when you manipulate cattle sales to cheat them of fair prices. They don't struggle when you systematically destroy anyone who won't sell to you at pennies on the dollar." Eliza pulled out a folded newspaper from her coat. "But you already know all this. I'm sure you've read the stories." Dunn's expression finally cracked, something cold and dangerous showing through. "You're making a mistake, Mrs. Vale, a very serious mistake. This territory operates on relationships, on understanding, on people knowing their place. You're disrupting that order. I'm ending that order. There's a difference. You think you've won because you got some newspaper to print lies?" Dunn's voice hardened. "You think federal authorities will care about frontier squabbles? They'll investigate, find nothing actionable, and leave. Then where will you be?" "We'll be exactly where we are now, standing, fighting, refusing to let men like you control us through fear." Dunn looked past her at Garrett, still visibly injured, swaying slightly but standing. "Vale, you're a reasonable man. Surely you understand that your wife is leading you to ruin. There's still time to salvage this. Sell me the ranch, take whatever money you can get, and walk away while you still can." "I'd rather burn it to the ground myself," Garrett said, his voice rough but steady, "than give you the satisfaction." "Then you're a fool. And fools die poor and forgotten in places like this." "Maybe. But we'll die free. Which is more than you'll ever be." The crowd was completely silent now, every eye on the confrontation playing out in broad daylight. Dunn looked at his armed men, then at the families gathered in the square, then at the witnesses watching from every doorway and window. Eliza could see the calculation happening, weighing the satisfaction of destroying them right now against the political cost of public violence. "This isn't over," Dunn said finally. "Not even close." "No," Eliza agreed, "but it's ending, and you know it." Dunn turned and walked away, his men following. But Eliza noticed something important. 3 of them hesitated before following, exchanging glances that suggested loyalty wasn't as solid as Dunn might have hoped. Fear was shifting sides. As the crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring and whispering, Henderson approached with a grim expression. "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest." "Still waiting to find out which," Eliza admitted. Her hands were shaking now that the confrontation was over, adrenaline finally catching up. "Dunn's not going to just accept defeat. He'll retaliate somehow. Let him try. Every move he makes now is public. Every threat is documented. Every act of violence proves our case." Eliza looked at the families still gathered in the square, exhausted, frightened, but still standing. "We just need to last a few more days." Those few days turned out to be the longest of Eliza's life. The families camped in town, taking over the community hall, the church basement, anywhere they could gather together where witnesses were constant. They took shifts on watch, documented every threat, reported every suspicious movement to the now reluctant sheriff. Dunn's men circled like wolves but didn't attack. Couldn't attack. Not with federal attention focused on the territory and newspapers printing updates daily. On the third day, Marcus Whitaker rode into town. He looked half dead, frostbitten, exhausted, his horse in even worse shape. But he was alive and carrying receipts showing he'd successfully delivered evidence to both the Territorial Commission and the Federal Marshal's office in Denver. "Took the mountain pass," he said when people crowded around asking how he'd survived. "Storm caught me halfway through, thought I was finished, but I remembered you kids were counting on me." He looked at Garrett and Eliza. "Figured I'd survived 73 winters. One more wasn't going to kill me." That night, Catherine Dunn appeared at the community hall where the families were staying. She looked nothing like the composed woman from the planning meeting. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen nearly shut. "My brother knows I've been helping you," she said without preamble. "He's not pleased." Sarah Morrison immediately brought her inside, started tending her injuries. "Why did you come here? If Dunn knows, because I'm done being afraid of him. Done watching him destroy this territory because he thinks money makes him untouchable." Catherine winced as Sarah cleaned the cut above her eye. "And because you should know, he's planning something. I don't know what exactly, but he's desperate. Desperate men don't think clearly." "What did you hear?" Garrett asked. "Just fragments. Something about making an example, about eliminating problems before federal marshals arrive." She met his eyes. He mentioned the Vale Ranch specifically, said it was symbolic, that destroying it would send the right message. Eliza felt ice in her stomach. "When?" "Tonight. Maybe tomorrow. Soon." They reinforced the watch immediately, doubled patrols, made sure everyone knew to report anything suspicious. But there were too many families to protect, spread across too much territory, and Dunn had too many resources. The attack came just before dawn on the 5th day. Not on the families in town, too many witnesses. Instead, Dunn's men hit the Vale Ranch one more time, while Garrett and Eliza were still in town with the others. By the time they got word and rode out, the damage was done. The house was burning. Not the controlled destruction of the barn. This was total annihilation. Flames roared from every window, consuming everything they'd built, everything they'd fought for, everything that remained of Garrett's family legacy. They arrived to find it already too late to save anything. Garrett dismounted and just stood there, watching 30 years of his family's work turn to ash, watching the place where he'd grown up, where his father had died trying to protect, disappear into smoke and flame. Eliza didn't have words, didn't know what to say to someone watching their entire world burn. Henderson and the others arrived minutes later, a bucket brigade forming instinctively, even though everyone knew it was futile. The house was gone. They were just keeping the fire from spreading to surrounding land. As dawn broke fully, painting the destruction in terrible clarity, Garrett sank to his knees in the mud. "He won," he said, voice hollow. "Dunn destroyed everything, the barn, the house, everything." Eliza knelt beside him. "He destroyed buildings, wood and stone. That's not everything. It's 30 years. It's 30 years of memories. And those don't burn." She took his face in her hands, forced him to look at her. "You're still alive. I'm still alive. The land is still here. We can rebuild." "With what? We have nothing left. We have each other. We have families willing to fight beside us. We have evidence that's already destroying Dunn's empire piece by piece." Her voice was fierce. "And we have the fact that he was desperate enough to do this, which means we're winning. This doesn't look like winning. Winning never does in the middle of the fight." As the sun climbed higher, something changed in Garrett's expression. The hollow devastation hardened into something sharper, more dangerous. "He took everything," Garrett said slowly. "My father's house, my family's legacy, everything I was trying to protect. Yes. So there's nothing left to lose." Eliza understood what he meant, saw it in his eyes. The transformation from a man desperately trying to save something into a man with nothing left to lose except the fight itself. "What are you thinking?" she asked carefully. "I'm thinking Horace Dunn just made his final mistake. He thought destroying the ranch would break us. Instead, he freed us to stop fighting defensively." Garrett stood, covered in ash and mud and smoke, looking more dangerous than Eliza had ever seen him. "We're not waiting for marshals anymore. We're not hiding behind public witnesses. We're ending this today." "How?" "By taking the one thing Dunn cares about more than power, his reputation." Garrett's smile was sharp as broken glass. He's been building his empire on the idea that he's untouchable, respectable, a legitimate businessman. We're going to destroy that image so completely that even if he escapes legal consequences, he'll never recover politically or socially. Henderson had been listening. You want to destroy him personally, not just legally. I want to make sure that when this is over, Horace Dunn is remembered as the fraud and bully he actually is, not as a victim of government overreach or frontier justice. Garrett looked at the burning ruins of his home. He took everything from me. I'm going to take his legacy. The marshals will be here tomorrow, Henderson said. Maybe we should wait. No more waiting. Garrett started walking back toward his horse. Eliza got the evidence published. Marcus got it to authorities. Catherine gave us inside information. Now it's time to finish what we started. By doing what exactly? Eliza asked, though she had a pretty good idea. By making Horace Dunn face everyone he's destroyed, in public, with witnesses, with no room to hide or lie or pretend he's anything except what he is. They rode back into town with a plan that was probably insane but felt absolutely necessary. Gathered the families. Sent word through every channel they could find that at noon in the town square there would be a public accounting of Horace Dunn's crimes. By 11:30, half the territory had gathered to watch. At noon exactly, Garrett Vale stood on the steps of the town hall and started speaking. My name is Garrett Vale. My father was Joseph Vale. He built a ranch 30 miles from here and spent 30 years making it into something he could be proud of. This morning, that ranch burned to the ground. Horace Dunn's men made sure of it. The crowd murmured. Dunn was there, flanked by his remaining loyalists, his face carefully neutral. But that ranch wasn't the first thing Dunn destroyed. It's just the most recent. Garrett pulled out papers, the evidence Eliza had compiled, the stories they'd documented, the timeline of systematic destruction. For 5 years, Dunn has been eliminating anyone who wouldn't sell to him, manipulating prices, rigging contracts, destroying families. He read names, dates, specific examples. The Henderson Ranch losing 70% of its value through fraudulent cattle sales. The Morrison family paying triple rate for basic supplies. The Whitaker foreclosure based on a loan with illegally modified interest rates. With each name, another family stepped forward, another witness, another person willing to say publicly what had been whispered privately for years. Dunn's expression never changed, but Eliza saw his hands clench, saw his men exchanging uncertain looks. When Garrett finished, Tom Henderson stepped up. I'm Tom Henderson. Dunn cheated me out of $1,500 last year alone. Here's the documentation. He held up contracts, receipts, proof. Sarah Morrison went next. Then the Callahans. Then Whitaker's nephew speaking for his uncle. One by one, families Dunn had destroyed stood up and named what he'd done. By the time they finished, it wasn't just testimony anymore. It was a trial. Public. Undeniable. With too many witnesses for anyone to dismiss as lies or exaggeration. Finally, Eliza stepped forward. My name is Eliza Vale. 3 months ago, I was nobody in this territory. Just a woman desperate enough to marry a stranger and try to survive on a failing ranch. She looked directly at Dunn. But I learned something important since arriving here. Power isn't about money or guns or who you can intimidate. Real power is about people choosing to stand together instead of being controlled separately. She gestured to the families surrounding her. These people chose to stand, chose to fight, chose to risk everything rather than let one man control their futures through fear. And that choice is more powerful than anything Horace Dunn ever built. The crowd erupted, not in violence, in voices. People who'd been silent for years suddenly finding courage to speak. Merchants Dunn had controlled admitting to coercion. Workers describing intimidation. Even a few of Dunn's own men stepping forward to testify about illegal orders they'd followed. It was everything Eliza had hoped for, and more. The complete dismantling of Dunn's power through simple truth spoken loud enough that silence was no longer possible. Dunn tried to respond, to defend himself, but his voice was drowned out. Nobody wanted to hear excuses anymore. As the sun began setting, federal marshals rode into town, earlier than expected, summoned by telegraph messages and newspaper stories that had created enough pressure to accelerate their response. They found a town already executing its own form of justice. Not violence, not revenge, just the complete social and political destruction of a man who'd built his empire on fear and silence. Horace Dunn was arrested that evening, charged with fraud, extortion, intimidation, and conspiracy. His compound was searched, his records seized, his political connections severed as everyone scrambled to distance themselves from the growing scandal. Within a week, additional charges emerged: bribery, contract fraud, illegal land seizures. The investigation Eliza had started kept expanding as more victims found courage to come forward. Dunn's empire didn't just collapse, it was dismantled piece by piece, crime by crime, until nothing remained except the memory of how completely he'd fallen. Standing in the town square that evening, watching marshals lead Dunn away in chains, Eliza felt Garrett's arm around her shoulders. "We did it," he said quietly. "We actually won." "We survived," Eliza corrected. "Winning comes later." "What's the difference?" "Surviving is staying alive long enough to fight. Winning is building something better from what's left." She leaned into him. "We survived, Garrett. Now we get to figure out how to win." Around them, families were celebrating, carefully, exhaustedly, like people who'd been holding their breath for months and could finally exhale. There would be challenges ahead: legal battles, rebuilding, learning to trust that the threat was really over. But for now, for this moment, they could simply stand together and feel the weight of fear lifting. Later that night, as the celebrations wound down and people drifted toward temporary homes and uncertain futures, Garrett and Eliza stood where the Vale Ranch house used to be. It was nothing but ash and charred timber now. No walls, no roof, no physical evidence that 30 years of history had stood here. "I don't know how to rebuild this," Garrett admitted. "Don't know if I even want to. Might be time to let it go. Or time to build something new," Eliza suggested. "Not your father's ranch, not the legacy you were trying to preserve, something that's actually ours." "What would that look like?" "I don't know yet, but I think that's the point. We get to decide. No more fighting to save the past. We build whatever future we want." Garrett pulled her closer against the cold. "When you answered my advertisement, did you ever imagine it would lead here? To standing in the ruins of a burned house after destroying a corrupt cattle baron?" Eliza smiled. "Not even remotely." "But you stayed anyway." "I stayed because somewhere between survival and partnership, this stopped being about escaping my past and started being about choosing my future." She turned to face him. "And I choose this. I choose you. I choose whatever we build together from these ashes. Even if it's hard? Especially if it's hard. Easy doesn't make you stronger. Struggle does. And I want to be strong enough to build something that lasts." Garrett kissed her then, gentle and thorough, like they had all the time in the world because for the first time since they'd met, they actually did. When they finally pulled apart, the stars were out and the temperature was dropping and everything was uncertain except the fact that they'd face it together. "Let's go home," Garrett said. "We don't have a home anymore." "Sure we do," he smiled. "Home's not a building, it's wherever you are." It was possibly the most romantic thing he'd ever said, and Eliza treasured it precisely because it came from a man who dealt in practical truths rather than pretty words. They walked back toward town hand in hand, leaving the ashes behind, ready to build whatever came next. The fight wasn't completely over. Dunn's legal battles would take months to resolve completely, and rebuilding would take years. But the siege was broken. The immediate danger had passed, and two people who'd started as strangers bound by desperation had become something infinitely more valuable. They'd become partners in every sense of the word. They'd become home. The federal trial of Horace Dunn lasted 6 weeks and pulled apart his empire thread by thread, until nothing remained but the truth of what he'd built and how he'd built it. Eliza sat in the courtroom gallery for most of it, watching a man who'd seemed untouchable reduced to just another criminal trying to justify the unjustifiable. Garrett came when he could, but rebuilding the ranch consumed most of his days. They'd decided against reconstructing the old house. Too many ghosts, too much weight of expectation. Instead, they were building something new on the same land, something that belonged to both of them equally, rather than being an inherited legacy Eliza could never quite claim as her own. The verdict came on a cold February morning. Guilty on 17 counts: fraud, extortion, conspiracy, bribery, illegal seizure. The judge sentenced Dunn to 12 years in territorial prison, with additional civil penalties that would bankrupt him even if he survived his sentence. Catherine Dunn sat in the front row throughout the trial, her bruised face healing slowly, her expression never changing as her brother's crimes were cataloged for public record. When the verdict was read, she simply stood and walked out without looking back. Eliza found her outside the courthouse, standing in the snow. "You all right?" Eliza asked. "My brother destroyed lives for profit, hurt people because he could, and I did nothing to stop it for years because I was too comfortable, too afraid, too convinced that family loyalty mattered more than justice." Catherine's voice was flat. "So no, I'm not all right. But I will be eventually. You helped us in the end. That matters." "Does it? Does helping at the last minute erase years of silent complicity?" Catherine finally looked at her. "I had evidence years ago. Could have stopped him before he destroyed so many families. But I told myself it wasn't my business, that I couldn't betray family. All the excuses cowards make when they're too comfortable to do the right thing." Eliza didn't offer false comfort. Catherine didn't need reassurance. She needed to sit with the weight of her choices and figure out how to carry it forward. "What will you do now?" Eliza asked instead. "Leave. Start over somewhere Dunn's name doesn't follow me. Maybe find a way to make amends, though I'm not sure that's possible." Catherine pulled her coat tighter against the wind. "What about you? Rebuild the ranch and pretend none of this happened. Rebuild the ranch and remember exactly what happened. There's a difference." Eliza watched snow fall on the courthouse steps. "Forgetting makes it easier to repeat the same mistakes. Remembering means you build something better." Catherine smiled slightly, the first genuine expression Eliza had seen from her. "You're tougher than you look, Mrs. Vale. So are you. You just spent years pretending you weren't." They parted ways after that, two women who'd been on opposite sides of the same fight, both learning to live with the choices they'd made. The weeks that followed the verdict were strange. The immediate danger was gone, but the habits of vigilance remained. Eliza still woke at odd hours listening for threats that weren't coming. Garrett still checked the perimeter with his rifle every evening, even though there was nothing left to attack except foundation stones and stubborn hope. Rebuilding was slower than either of them expected. Not because of money. The Territorial Commission had awarded damages to families Dunn had defrauded, and the Vale Ranch received enough to rebuild properly. But because building something new required decisions about what they actually wanted rather than what they were trying to preserve. "Do we need a barn this large?" Garrett asked one evening, reviewing plans. "We're not running the same operation my father did." "Smaller herd, different focus." "What do you want to focus on?" Eliza asked. "Honestly, I don't know anymore. I spent so long just trying to survive that I never thought about what comes after survival." "Then maybe that's what we figure out together. Not what your father wanted, not what the ranch has always been. What we actually want to build." It was a harder question than it sounded. Garrett had spent 30 years living for a legacy he'd inherited. Eliza had spent her entire adult life running from the past. Neither of them had much practice choosing a future deliberately, but they started trying. Some decisions were practical. They scaled back the cattle operation, focusing on quality over quantity, added chickens, expanded the vegetable garden, diversified in ways that made them less vulnerable to market manipulation. Hired Timothy and his mother once the boys' testimony at Dunn's trial was complete, gave them the small cabin on the property and fair wages for work that had nothing to do with loyalty or intimidation. Other decisions were harder, more personal. One evening in early spring, with the new house framing going up and the worst of winter finally breaking, Garrett brought Eliza to the small family cemetery on the eastern edge of the property. His father's grave was marked with a simple stone. Joseph Vale, 1801 to 1851. Beloved father, dedicated rancher. "I used to come here every week," Garrett said quietly. "Stand here and promise I'd save what he built, keep the legacy alive, make his death mean something." He paused. "But I don't think that's what he would have wanted." "No?" "He died trying to save a ranch during a storm. Walked into a blizzard and never came back because he couldn't let the cattle die." Garrett's voice went rough. "I used to think that was noble, sacrifice for something bigger than yourself. But now I think maybe it was just sad. He loved this place so much, he forgot to love living." Eliza took his hand. "You're not him." "No, I'm not. And I don't want to be." He looked at her. "I want to build something worth living for, not just dying for. Want a ranch that supports our life instead of consuming it. Want—" He stopped, struggling. "Want you to be happy here. Not just surviving, but actually happy."
I am happy.
You're content. There's a difference. You're making the best of a situation you chose out of desperation. Garrett turned to face her fully. But if you could choose anything, without desperation, without necessity, what would you actually want? It was the first time anyone had asked her that question since she'd left Philadelphia. Maybe the first time anyone had asked her that question ever.
Eliza thought about the woman who'd arrived in Blackstone Ridge 6 months ago. Worn suitcase, nowhere to go, running from one kind of destruction toward another. That woman had wanted safety, independence, freedom from control. The woman standing here now wanted something different. I want what we're building, she said finally. Not the ranch specifically, but the partnership. The choice to stand beside someone instead of being owned by them or running from them. The feeling that my decisions matter and my voice counts, and my strength isn't a threat to be controlled but an asset to be valued. That's what you want from me? That's what you already give me. Every day. Every decision we make together. Every time you ask what I think instead of telling me what to do. Eliza squeezed his hand. You asked if I could choose anything without desperation. This is what I choose. Building something with someone who sees me as an equal. That's worth more than safety or comfort or any of the things I thought I wanted when I answered your advertisement. Garrett pulled her close, and they stood in the small cemetery while spring wind carried away the last of winter and brought with it the smell of thawing earth and new possibilities. My father's legacy isn't this land, Garrett said quietly. It's the lesson that fighting to preserve the past can kill you. But fighting to build something new, that might actually be worth the struggle. They left the cemetery hand in hand, leaving Joseph Vale's stone to watch over a ranch that was transforming into something he'd never envisioned but might have been proud of anyway. The house took shape throughout spring and into summer. It was smaller than the original, built for 2 people rather than a family dynasty. Large kitchen because they'd learned that planning and strategizing happened best around a table with coffee and paperwork spread everywhere. 2 bedrooms, one for them, one for guests or future possibilities, neither of them quite dared to name yet. Wide porch facing east to catch sunrise, because Eliza had discovered she loved watching daybreak paint the mountains while the world was still quiet. Other families rebuilt too. The Morrisons expanded their operation with insurance money and loans from banks that weren't controlled by Horace Dunn. The Callahans repaired their collapsed roof and added a new barn. Marcus Whitaker, celebrated as the old man tough enough to cross the winter pass and survive, spent his newfound fame helping younger ranchers navigate territorial bureaucracy. Blackstone Ridge itself changed. Patterson's store got a new owner after Patterson fled town ahead of fraud charges, a widow named Margaret Chen who'd lost her husband to one of Dunn's schemes and had the accounting skills to run the business honestly. The sheriff resigned in disgrace, replaced by his deputy Miller, who'd testified against Dunn despite personal risk. The territory didn't become paradise. Money was still tight. Weather was still brutal. Ranching was still backbreaking work that paid poorly and punished mistakes harshly, but fear stopped being the dominant currency. People started trading fairly because they knew cheating would be called out publicly rather than suffered in silence. Disputes got resolved through honest negotiation rather than whoever had more guns or money. Families helped each other during hard times because they'd learned what fighting together could accomplish. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. In late August, a letter arrived from Catherine Dunn. She'd moved to San Francisco, was working for a women's charitable organization helping frontier families in crisis. The letter was brief, factual, ending with a single line that carried more weight than its simplicity suggested. "Thank you for showing me what courage actually looks like. I'm trying to learn," Eliza wrote back. They corresponded occasionally after that, never close, but connected by the shared experience of surviving the same war from different sides. The ranch held its first harvest celebration in September. Not grand, just the families who'd fought together gathering for food and music and the simple pleasure of being alive and free. Tom Henderson brought his fiddle. Sarah Morrison organized enough food to feed 20 people. Timothy's mother, recovering slowly from her illness with access to medicine she could finally afford, taught the younger children songs from her childhood. Garrett stood at the edge of the celebration watching Eliza laugh at something Henderson said. Her face relaxed in a way it never was during their early months together. She'd gained weight, healthy weight from consistent food and reduced stress, and moved through the world with a confidence that had nothing to do with bravado
and everything to do with knowing her own strength. "You look like a man contemplating something serious," Marcus Whitaker said, appearing beside him with a mug of cider. "Just thinking about how different this is from a year ago. A year ago you were drowning and too proud to admit it. Now you're hosting celebrations." Whitaker took a drink. "Funny how almost losing everything teaches you what actually matters. What do you think matters? Not what. Who?" Whitaker nodded toward Eliza. "That woman crossed dangerous territory alone to save evidence that saved all of us. Stood up to Dunn when everyone else was too afraid. Convinced a whole territory that fighting back was possible." He looked at Garrett. "And somehow she chose to build a life with you. Don't waste that gift trying to recreate the past." You're not trying as hard as you used to, but part of you still thinks you owe your father something. Still feels guilty for not preserving exactly what he built." Whitaker's voice softened. "Let me tell you something about fathers and legacies, son. The best thing Joseph Vale ever did wasn't building a ranch. It was raising a boy stubborn enough to fight for what he believed in and smart enough to recognize a true partner when she showed up. That's the legacy, not the land." Garrett watched Eliza catch his eye across the celebration and smile, and something settled in his chest that had been restless for 30 years. "You're right," he said. "Of course I am. I'm old. Being right is compensation for being decrepit." Whitaker clapped him on the shoulder. "Now go dance with your wife before she thinks you forgot how." Garrett had never been good at dancing, had 2 left feet and the rhythm of a fence post. But Eliza pulled him into the improvised dance area anyway, and they stumbled through something that barely qualified as movement but made her laugh, which was worth the embarrassment. "We're terrible at this," she said as he stepped on her foot for the 3rd time. "Some things we're good at. Dancing isn't one of them." "What are we good at?" "Surviving, fighting, building things from nothing." He pulled her closer, despite the music. "Being stubborn enough to choose each other even when it would be easier not to. That's the most romantic thing you've said without immediately taking it back." "I'm getting better at this." "At what?" "Admitting I need you, want you, love you." Garrett said it clearly, deliberately, loud enough that several nearby dancers definitely heard. "And not just because you saved the ranch, because you saved me from becoming the kind of man who dies alone trying to preserve something that should have evolved years ago." Eliza stopped dancing entirely, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "That was dangerously close to a real romantic declaration," she said finally. "I'm trying something new, being honest about feelings instead of hiding behind practical arrangements. How's that working for you?" "Terrifying, but worth it." She kissed him right there in front of everyone, and the celebration erupted in cheers and catcalls and good-natured teasing that lasted the rest of the evening. Later, when the guests had gone and they were cleaning up by lamplight, Eliza found herself thinking about the woman she'd been when she arrived. How that version of herself would never have believed she'd end up here. Not just geographically, but emotionally. Happy, settled, choosing to stay instead of running. "What are you thinking about?" Garrett asked, carrying plates inside. "How strange it is that the worst year of my life led to the best parts of it." "You think this is the best part, don't you?" He set down the plates, pulled her into his arms. "I think the best part is knowing we get to keep building it together. That this isn't the ending, it's just the beginning of whatever comes next." "What do you think comes next?" "Hopefully less violence and property destruction." "That's a low bar. I'm trying to manage expectations." He smiled. "But honestly, I think we figure out how to live instead of just survive. Raise some cattle, maybe some kids eventually if you want them. Help the territory stay honest. Prove that frontier life doesn't have to be about who's strongest or most ruthless. It can be about who's willing to work together. You want kids? Someday. If you do, no pressure." Garrett suddenly looked nervous. "We never talked about that part. The practical arrangement didn't exactly include family planning discussions." "We've renegotiated most of the arrangement already. Might as well renegotiate that part too." Eliza leaned into him. "Someday sounds good. Once we're sure the world's not actively trying to kill us anymore." "Fair criteria." They finished cleaning in comfortable silence, the kind of quiet that comes from knowing each other well enough that conversation isn't always necessary. As winter approached again, the first winter they'd face in their new house, built on old land with new purpose, Eliza stood on the porch, watching snow clouds gather over the peaks. A year ago, those clouds would have meant fear, isolation, the possibility of dying alone in the cold. Now they just meant winter, difficult but survivable, something to prepare for rather than dread. Garrett joined her on the porch, handing her a mug of coffee. "Snow coming," he observed, "always does." "We're ready this time. Full larder, stocked firewood, reinforced barn, no corrupt cattle baron trying to destroy us during vulnerable moments. Amazing how much easier survival is without active enemies. Revolutionary concept." He sipped his coffee. "Think we'll get bored now that life's relatively peaceful?" "Bored?" Eliza laughed. "We're running a ranch in frontier territory. I don't think peaceful is possible, just different kinds of challenging." She was right. Winter brought its own challenges. Harsh weather, sick livestock, supply shortages that had nothing to do with manipulation and everything to do with mountain passes being impassable for weeks. But they faced those challenges as partners, with community support, without the constant weight of fear that someone was actively working to destroy them. It was hard, but it was honest hard. The kind of difficulty that built strength instead of breaking spirit. Spring came again, as it always did. The new house settled into its foundation. The land responded to careful management instead of desperate exploitation. Timothy proved gifted with horses, started training them for sale to supplement ranch income. His mother's health improved enough that she took over the expanded garden, providing vegetables that the ranch sold to Margaret Chen's store at fair prices. The territory continued healing. Dunn's trial became a case study in territorial law journals about corruption and accountability. Families who'd lost land to his schemes fought legal battles to reclaim what they could. Not everyone won. Justice wasn't perfect, but it was present, which was more than could be said before. In early summer, Eliza discovered she was pregnant. The realization hit her one morning while she was feeding chickens, sudden nausea making the world tilt sideways. She'd been tired lately, emotional in ways that didn't match her personality, craving odd foods at odd hours. She told Garrett that evening over dinner, watching his face carefully for reaction. He went very still, set down his fork, looked at her like she'd just told him something world-changing, which she supposed she had. "A baby," he said slowly. "Sometime in late winter, best I can figure. Is this?" Eliza suddenly felt uncertain in a way she rarely did anymore. "We said someday, but we never specified when someday might be, and I know the ranch is still rebuilding and money's tight, and—" Garrett stood, crossed to her side of the table, pulled her into his arms with a gentleness that suggested she was suddenly made of glass. "This is perfect," he said quietly. "Terrifying and perfect and exactly right." "You're not worried?" "Of course I'm worried. I'm terrified. I don't know how to be a father. Don't know if I'll be any good at it." He pulled back to look at her. "But I know we'll figure it out together, same way we've figured out everything else." "Together," Eliza agreed, and felt something settle that she hadn't realized was uncertain. The pregnancy progressed through summer and into fall. Eliza worked as long as her body allowed, then reluctantly accepted help from Garrett and Timothy and neighbors who seemed to materialize with food and assistance whenever needed. "This is what community means," Sarah Morrison said one afternoon, helping Eliza preserve vegetables for winter. "Not just fighting battles together, but supporting each other through normal life, too." "Normal life feels strange after everything we went through. You'll get used to it. Might even start to like it." Sarah smiled. "My oldest was born the winter after my husband died. Thought I couldn't handle it alone. But turns out you're never really alone when you've built relationships strong enough to carry you through hard times." The baby came in February during a snowstorm, because of course the universe had a sense of timing. Doc Williams made it through drifts that should have been impassable, delivered a healthy baby girl who came into the world screaming her displeasure at the cold. Garrett held his daughter with shaking hands, looking at her tiny face like he'd been handed something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's furious," Eliza said, exhausted but smiling. "Takes after me." They named her Rose, after Garrett's mother who died when he was young. Rose Vale, born into a world that wasn't safe or easy, but was honest and hopeful in ways it hadn't been a year ago. The first weeks were brutal in the way new parenthood always is. Sleepless nights, constant worry, learning to navigate being responsible for a tiny human while still managing a ranch and all the practical realities of frontier life. But they managed, together. One evening, when Rose was maybe 6 weeks old, Garrett found Eliza on the porch, their porch, watching sunrise like she loved, with the baby wrapped against her chest. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you. But here we both are." He sat beside her, and they watched pink light spread across the mountains while their daughter made small sleeping sounds against Eliza's chest.
"I've been thinking," Garrett said quietly, "about everything that led here. The desperation that made me write that advertisement. The circumstances that made you answer it. How close we came to losing everything so many times." "Regretting it?" "Opposite. I'm grateful for it. All of it." He took her free hand. Not grateful for the suffering or the fear or the danger, but grateful that it led here. To this. To you and me and Rose and the life we're building. Even though it started as a practical arrangement, even though neither of us chose this for romantic reasons? Especially because of that. We chose each other for survival, stayed for partnership, built toward love. Garrett's voice was soft. That's more real than any romance that starts with pretty feelings and falls apart the first time things get hard. We started hard. Everything after is just us choosing each other when we could choose differently. Eliza thought about the woman who'd arrived in Blackstone Ridge with a worn suitcase and nowhere else to go. Thought about how that woman would never have believed she'd end up here, not just geographically, but emotionally. A mother, a rancher, a woman who'd helped bring down a corrupt empire and rebuild an honest community. Someone who'd learned that strength wasn't about never needing help. It was about building relationships strong enough that help was freely given and freely received. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said. "What?" "I came here running from a man who thought he controlled me. Thought I was escaping one kind of prison for a different kind of freedom." She looked at Garrett. "But I wasn't escaping. I was finding something I didn't know existed. Partnership that doesn't diminish either person. Love that doesn't require surrender. Strength that comes from standing together instead of standing alone." "You taught me that," Garrett said. "I was drowning in isolation, convinced asking for help was weakness. You showed me that the real weakness was refusing to accept partnership when it was offered." Rose stirred against Eliza's chest, made a small sound of protest, then settled back into sleep. They sat in comfortable silence, watching morning break over land they'd fought for, died for, rebuilt together. The ranch would never be what Joseph Vale envisioned. It was something different now, something that belonged to both of them equally, that would belong to their daughter as she grew. A legacy built not on preservation, but on transformation, on the willingness to let go of what was in order to build what could be. "What do you think Rose will remember about all this?" Garrett asked. "Hopefully nothing. She's too young for memories." Eliza smiled. "But someday we'll tell her about the winter her parents almost lost everything, about the fight to build something honest in a place built on fear, about how the strongest thing you can do is stand beside someone and refuse to let either of you fall alone. That's a lot of pressure for a 6-week-old. She's got time to grow into it." As the sun climbed higher and the ranch woke to another day of work and possibility and the 1,000 small challenges of frontier life, Eliza felt something she'd been chasing since leaving Philadelphia without knowing what she was looking for. Peace, not the absence of struggle, there would always be struggle, but the presence of purpose, the certainty that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, with exactly who she was supposed to be with, building exactly what mattered. The frontier had a way of stripping everything down to what was essential. And what was essential, Eliza had learned, wasn't safety or comfort or even survival. It was connection, partnership. The choice to stand together when standing alone would be easier. That's what she'd found in Blackstone Ridge. Not in the land or the ranch or even the victory over Dunn. In Garrett. In the community they'd helped build. In their daughter sleeping peacefully against her chest while morning light painted the mountains in shades of gold and possibility. "We should go inside," Garrett said eventually. "You're going to freeze out here." "In a minute. I want to watch a little longer." So they sat together on their porch, watching their land wake up to another day, another season, another year of building something worth the fight. And if someone had told that desperate woman with the worn suitcase that this is where answering a brutal advertisement would lead to love and partnership and a daughter,
and a life she'd choose every time given the chance, she never would have believed it. But belief wasn't required, just the willingness to try, to fight, to stand beside someone through winter storms and burning buildings and corrupt empires, and discover that the strongest foundations are built not on avoiding hardship, but on facing it together. The Vale Ranch would stand for generations after this, not as a monument to one man's vision, but as proof that transformation was possible, that empires built on fear could fall, that desperate arrangements could become real love, that sometimes the best things in life started with nothing more than two strangers desperate enough to try something different, brave enough to keep choosing each other when easier options existed, and stubborn enough to build something beautiful from the ashes of everything they'd almost lost. Years later, people would still talk about the winter Blackstone Ridge almost fell to Horace Dunn's corruption, about the families who stood together, about the woman who crossed dangerous territory to save evidence that saved everyone. But in the Vale household, they'd remember something different. They'd remember the morning Eliza arrived with a worn suitcase and uncertain future. The first time Garrett smiled genuinely after years of grim survival. The night they decided to fight instead of surrender. The moment they realized their arrangement had become something neither of them could walk away from. They'd remember building a life from desperation and discovering that sometimes the strongest loves are the ones that start as something else entirely and transform into exactly what both people needed without knowing they needed it. And when Rose grew old enough to ask about how her parents met, they'd tell her the truth. Not a romance, not a fairy tale. Just two people who needed each other's strength, discovered each other's worth, and chose to build something together that was stronger than either of them could build alone. That was the real legacy. Not the land, not the victory, not even the survival. The choice to keep choosing each other, every day, through everything the frontier in life could throw at them. Together.